On the streets of winter night, a few pedestrians hurried hurriedly in the cold wind. Bai Zioxi walked out of the hot drink shop, holding the milk tea in both hands, and couldn't wait to breathe in. The white cheeks bulged, like two pink-white swimaniangs, slowly disappearing again. The fragrance of milk and tea filled the mouth. The milk tea is a small portion. She drank a half cup in one sip and relieved her hunger a little. She couldn't bear to the rest. She held it in her hand and walked for 10 steps before allowing herself to take a sip. The system really looks down on her shabby, drink milk tea, now should I work with peace of mind? When you hook up successfully, let alone a small cup of milk tea, you can buy a milk tea shop. Bai Zioxi's eyes were shining, and he hurriedly said, "Don't want a milk tea shop. I want a cup of milk tea with coconut, pearls, ba, milk cover, and whole sugar to ice." She said her words were not fast, and her voice was soft, seemingly milky. The system was speechless, and the little fox in the country, who had gone down the mountain for a few days, entered the milk tea shop for 3 minutes, and the milk tea industry lingo had already been set. After turning 2 streets, the surrounding area gradually calmed down. There were no neon flashing shops on both sides of the road, only tall sycamore trees stood quietly. The street lights are hidden among the branches, casting large and small spots and shadows. The system pointed her to a dark place. "Just hide there, wait and see my prompt to rush forward." Bai Zioxi nodded with a straw in his hand. It was clean here, let alone pedestrians, and there were not a few cars in sight. A few minutes later, without waiting for the target, she drank the milk tea first, and she looked around for the trash can. "Come!" The system was suddenly excited. "Go!" Ignoring the trash can, Bai Zioxi rushed out carrying an empty cup. Bang pound! With a loud noise, the driving car was abruptly knocked to a stop, flew out for a short distance against the ground, and stopped after hitting the ground half a circle. Standing on the spot, Bai Zioxi subconsciously took a mouthful of milk tea, only to breathe in full of air. When she remembered, the system said she would lie down after touching the porcelain, so she hurriedly sat on the ground and lay down slowly, with her hands on her abdomen, her eyelashes drooping, and she was particularly serene. Night, silence. Thousands of words in the system's heart, and finally turned into "fortunately, he is a mature system with excellent adaptability." Before the people in the car could react, he rummaged in his backpack for a while, grabbed a backtracking card and threw it out. With a flower in front of Bai Zioxi, he found himself squatting back under the tree again, and the car in the middle of the road was gone. "Ah, milk tea! The milk tea that I just drank, now there is half a cup left." She was so happy that her eyes were crooked. The system heart is very tired. He just used backtracking and adjusted the time back to 5 minutes ago. That is the benefit of the mastermind for pure newcomers. It was once and only once. It was originally intended to be kept as a secret weapon, but he didn't even expect that the mission target's face would be missing. Use it when you see it. But this little fox only cared about the half cup of milk tea. That cup of extremely cheap milk tea that can't afford the pearl coconut milk tea. What is even more annoying is that he still dare not say anything. The superiors have greeted him a long time ago, let him be patient and take care of him. The little fox has just grown up. It is the first time he has come down from the mountain. He has never been in contact with human society. It is like a blank sheet of paper. You can't use the standard of ordinary vixen to ask her. To ask him to give priority to guidance, the second is whether the task is completed or not. In a nutshell, the little fox has someone on his head and has a big background, and he can't afford it. Bai Zioxi, who had some people above him, realized that he nodded on his toes, pinched his fingers, and asked in a low voice, 8 or 8, did I do something wrong? System ID 0368, homophonic you are stupid, very much in line with his current state of mind. 0368 the tone is as peaceful as a sage, don't blame you, it's my estimation error. He didn't expect the little fox's body data to be so high that he wouldn't blink when he knocked over a car. He was preconceived, thinking that the little fox would understand, but he didn't explain clearly the skills of touching porcelain. He didn't expect the little fox to be so real, and he would actually run into it. It's him, it's him, it's him, our Sayat, digress. In short, it was his fault. Bai Zioxi drank the milk tea again. This time he drank more slowly. Before looking for the trash can, he saw a familiar car turning in from the intersection and approaching them. Are you going to rush out now? The little fox was ready to move. She still doesn't quite understand why the system has to be restarted. It may be because she ran too slowly last time. This time she must have run into it as fast as possible. The system woke up from the self-review and was shocked. No need. Once again, there is no backtracking available. With the strange power of the little fox knocking over the car, he will be on the news search every minute, and maybe he will be arrested for research. That's why the system is called to die before leaving the teacher, which often makes the system burst into tears. Yu Yaitong watched the car swaggering past them. Bai Zioxi looked regretful, as if he saw the huge cup of milk tea flying away. The system was relieved with lingering fears. He hurriedly explained the true meaning of touching porcelain, so that the little fox knew that this touch is not the other touch, so as not to encounter any major trouble next time. Bai Zioxi nodded obediently after being taught. Seeing that she is pretty well behaved, the system feels a little more comfortable. What should I do next? Bai Zioxi asked. The system is also considering this issue. He is a true love system, as the name suggests, is to let the host fall in love with the target. He was considered a senior and veteran. After receiving information from this world before, he quickly formulated 3 sets of plans. Option 1, the hostess was hit by the host's car, and the host gave her a card for medical expenses and compensation. Feminists just verbally refused, and stubbornly said, "Don't want your bad money." So the male protagonist was attracted by this pure and unpretentious person, and began a sour and sweet chasing love. Option 2, the hostess pays the debts on behalf of the father and repays with her body. She is pale and weak, stubborn, and also attracts the attention of the male protagonist. 2 people, I love you, you don't love me, you just love my money, and I love you, you love me, but how come you have a fiancé? Love-hate entanglement, body abuse, entangled. Stretched to the end of the world. Plan 3, drunk in the nightclub, one night, love to run with the ball, a few years later, with the strong return of genius son, slap in the face of everyone. Cough, although it's all ancient idioms, but isn't it the saying? Popularity is a circle, 20 years of reincarnation, this round of reincarnation is not a reincarnation. It doesn't matter whether the routine is not the routine, the vulgar, or the vulgar is not the vulgar. The great men have said, no matter black cat or white cat, catching mice is a good cat. Looking at it now, option 1 is no longer working. As for option 3, the system feels that if he dares to let the little fox who doesn't understand anything run with the ball, the person above the little fox might tear down his system and rebuild it. The only remaining option 2 was rejected because it was not enough because of the strict investigations recently. So he needs to plan carefully. He is a senior manager, and he doesn't believe that he will not be able to bring along a newcomer. Go back first. The system finally said. After all, they entered the mission world for less than an hour. When they came, they were on the street. As soon as the system had finished introducing herself and assigned the initial mission to the little fox, she was attracted by the fragrance wafting from the milk tea shop. The system assigned Bai Zioxi as a college student. The school has already put on winter vacation, and she applied to stay in school. The whole world is fictitious, and her current body is naturally a bunch of data, so the system was only surprised by her strange power before this is not justified. The body data of his former host is at most a little higher than that of ordinary people, and the data of the little fox is so strong that it is not set according to the standards of the big monster. The system realized again that there was someone behind the little fox, and that person guarded her tightly. Even in the fictional world, she would not be harmed at all. Bai Zioxi left the hiding place under the tree and followed the system instructions to find the bus stop, planning to take the bus back to school. Whether it's the cars coming and going on the road, the flashing lights on both sides, or the mobile phones in the hands of pedestrians, she is very curious. A few days ago, she was a little fox on Mingshan. She just woke up from a deep sleep and found that the mountain was empty. Master did not know where to go, and her former friends were gone. She plucked up the courage to go down the mountain, but the world is no longer what she remembered. The villages not far from the foot of the mountain have disappeared, replaced by giants. Instead of horse-drawn carriages, there are four-wheeled tin wagons. There are even huge ones in the sky. The iron bird whizzed by. The little fox stepped out, was frightened back. Fortunately, she met another Yeozu at the foot of the mountain. According to the other party, he was entrusted by her master to wait there. Seeing that he took out the master's token, the little fox put down his guard. It is said that the master is now far away and cannot come back for a while. If she wants to find him, she must have a human social identity certificate and money. And the Baxi that just came down the mountain was poor and poor. That Yeozu took her for 3 days of general knowledge education and training, and then arranged the task of binding the system. Therefore, the small goal of Little Fox at this stage is to earn enough travel expenses to find master. Suddenly it was so quiet, and the system was a little unaccustomed. He was afraid that the little fox would be hit by the failure just now. He found a topic: when you get in touch with the target, do you know how to make the other person fall in love with you? He thought that with the innocence of the little fox, he would surely ask 3 questions, and then he could give some pointers. But Bai Zioxi said happily, "I know, Wai Wei told me." "Who is Wai Wei?" "My good friend, Wai Wei is a snake monster, but it's amazing." She said, "If you want a man to fall in love with you, you must first fall in love with him." In fact, the snake monster in the game world has indeed taught the little fox a lot of experience. This is just one of them, but her original words are, "Men are arrogant and narcissistic. As long as you make him think that you love him to death, even if you don't love you for the time being, he will have more pity for you. With this pity, he will not escape your palm. Heart. When it comes to the little fox, it becomes, if you want him to love me, I must love him first." The system was taken aback by these remarks. What if you can't fall in love with him? Bai Zioxi tilted his head and said slowly, "Why? He can buy me a large cup of milk tea. Of course I love him." The system felt that her IQ had been lowered by the little fox, otherwise how could she discuss this issue with her in a serious manner? He actually counted on a little fox who didn't know what it was touching porcelain to know what love is. This is not the fault of the other party, but his own. Bai Zioxi is still publishing her fox words. "I went to class for a few days after going down the mountain. There is a saying in the book that the effects of force are mutual. In this case, the effects of love should also be mutual. I love him first. And then he will love me. What Wai Wei said is right." System indifferent face, yeah, that's right, you're all right," Newton popped out of the ground. It is indeed a little fairy who has received 3 days of education. Ordinary people have 9 years of compulsory education, so they are not as good as you. 002 The system needs to prepare for the new plan, and Bai Zioxi has stayed in the school dormitory these days. She was a little fox who had no choice but to learn. During this time, she looked through the college textbooks. The major selected by the system was liberal arts. If she can't read and understand the content of the book, let's not talk about it for now. Fortunately, she was originally able to learn traditional Chinese characters, and it was quite basic to learn these simplified characters with missing arms and legs. After that, she went to find a part-time job, with little technical content, working as a milk promoter in the supermarket. At the end of the year, there was a lot of traffic in the supermarket. She was well behaved and won the favor of aunts. She performed very well. The basic salary plus commission on the first day was more than 200 yuan. At the end of the payday, she received the money and immediately went to buy a large cup of milk tea. But after only 2 days of this job, the system said to her, "Go, change job." Why? Bai Zioxi is puzzled. She likes this part-time job and likes so much food on the supermarket shelves. The system rolled his eyes slightly. When you sell milk in the supermarket, when can you reach the target? Wait for him to buy milk. Wake up, the overbearing president will not mix in the group of ants to buy milk. Well, what new job do I have to change? Just follow my command, let's change to a high-end place. Bai Zioxi followed the system's instructions and arrived at a high-end venue, a club dedicated to drinking tea. It is said that only high-income people can afford it, and I don't know where the system found out about recruiting people. Originally, it was a supervisor who interviewed her, but then a young man with a fierce face came, and the supervisor called him Wei Ji. Bai Zioxi looked at Wei Ji curiously, and secretly asked the system, "Is he the target of the mission? It looks a bit fierce, will you really buy her a large cup of milk tea?" The system comprehended her unfinished words, and couldn't help being speechless. "We are Vixen anyway, can we have something to pursue? He is just a bodyguard leader." Bai Zioxi said. Just at this moment Wei Ji spoke. "Bai Zioxi." "Yes." In front of Wei Ji was her temporarily prepared resume. "I'm still a college student, applying for a waiter, only doing part-time jobs. The waiters here are all full-time, and only tea masters can do part-time jobs. Tea artist." Bai Zioxi didn't even know this profession, but she couldn't even distinguish the varieties of tea. Wei Ji said, "There is no foundation to train. Just now I heard that a very beautiful girl was applying for the job." He was curious in his heart and came in to take a look. As expected, she looked very good, so he wanted to keep her. The main reason is that the tea masters get in touch with the guests up close, and they also perform tea art. They look more upright, and the guests are also pleasing to the eye. He was about to persuade again when the door of the office was suddenly pushed open, and people walked in briskly. "William, what is the cat doing here? Go out and sit together." Brother Wei stood up immediately. "Mr. Gong." Gong Yifei waved his hand. "Sit down and say not to come to this set." "Yo, who is this little beauty?" Bai Zioxi was quietly looking at this Mr. Gong again, and before she asked her questions, the system said, "This is not the goal either." Bai Zioxi bulged his cheeks. The system didn't say, "Well, you think it's so easy to arrange for you to meet with the target. It's so easy to get in touch with this surname Gong. This club is one of his properties, and he is also a friend of the target. If so, I'm not mistaken, they have a party tonight, you can't miss this opportunity." The implication was that in front of Gong Yifei, Bai Zioxi had to perform well. While talking, Wei Ji also explained Bai Zioxi's identity to Gong Yifei. It turns out to be a newcomer. Gong Yifei touched his chin with great interest. The little girl in front of her was fair and slender, she was lovely when she looked down, and she was cute and lovely when she looked down. Gong Yifei has a lot of knowledge, knowing that such a natural fascination is much harder than an ordinary beauty who is exposed to fascination. If the system knows his thoughts, it must cut it out. This is a vixen, even if it doesn't understand anything, it's also a vixen. The blink of an eye fascinates people, not just for fun. Gong Yifei turned a few thoughts in his mind and asked Wei Ji, "Are you sure you are a good student?" Wei Ji nodded affirmatively and checked all his documents. Gong Yifei smiled and patted him on the shoulder, and said, "You found a baby, I will take away the little beauty. I will be a part-time waiter first, and I will talk about whether you want to develop into a tea artist." "Yes." Bai Zioxi followed Gong Yifei away, changed into a clean waiter uniform, and walked through the elegant and quiet corridor. Gong Yifei glanced at her from time to time and asked her how old she was and what major she studied. After a few times, he stopped looking at her. The little girl really shook people's hearts. Looking at it a few more times, he was afraid that he would be reluctant to push her out. Before pushing open a door, he said, "Be smarter when you enter, and stand next to the man on the far left, you know." "But I haven't trained yet." Gong Yifei bowed his hand. "It's very simple, just serve a cup of tea. You do what others do." After speaking, I opened the door and went in. The space inside was unexpectedly wide. There were 3 walls and the side facing the door was an open corridor. At this time, a tea artist was performing on the corridor, and others were sitting in the room watching. The light in the room was not very bright. Gong Yifei attracted the attention of a few people, but no one noticed Bai Zioxi. She walked along the wall, moved in small steps to the person sitting alone on the far left, standing next to the sofa. The other party noticed it and turned to look at her. Bai Zioxi couldn't see his facial features, only those deep eyes, which appeared darker and darker in the dim. She didn't even know she was afraid when facing the fierce brother Wei just now. Just such a pair of eyes made her feel a little bit of timidity in her heart. She lowered her eyes not to meet him, and said in her heart, "I can't see you, you can't see me, I can't see you, you can't see me. Hey, the sweet cake on the coffee table seems it looks delicious." Bai Zioxi's attention shifted instantly, his eyes filled with only the delicate pastry. "But that thing was someone else's, not hers, so I had to look at it eagerly." The system waited for a long time, but did not see the little fox asking him about the mission goal, so he had to take the initiative to speak. "Why don't you ask this person this time?" Bai Zioxi was hooked by the cake. He was absent-minded, is he? It's him. The system dropped heavy bombs and bombs. Bai Zioxi was stunned, and subconsciously wanted to turn his head to look at the people around him, turning halfway, thinking of those eyes, then stopped abruptly, and turned back nonchalantly. "Can't see me, can't see me." The system mistakenly thought she was so calm, and said with satisfaction, "That's it, hold on. I have successfully met the target, and I will leave the rest to you freely. I am in a hurry and leave a message if I have something to do." "What? 8, wait a minute." The system didn't respond, he had run away. Bai Zioxi's stomach was full of distress, his slender shoulders collapsed, and the small eyes staring at the cake became even more resentful, which made people want to ignore it. Suddenly stretched out a slender hand next to him, and pushed the cake plate in front of her. "Eat it!" Surprise joy! In the blink of an eye, Bai Zioxi threw the thought of "this man has so fierce eyes, he must be a bad person" to the horizon. At this moment, in her eyes, there is nothing better than the one who gave her cake. However, she still remembered her identity as a waiter. How could she eat the guest's food? She reluctantly said, "Thank you, I'm still working." The man said softly, "I don't think your boss will mind." Bai Zioxi only persisted for 3 seconds, and then gave up struggling. It's a big deal not to have this job. She sat down with joy, picked up a small spoon, dug a bite of the cake, and before putting it in her mouth, she wanted to be polite, and asked the other person fakely and shyly, "Aren't you going to eat it?" Yan Xingzi said, "I'm not good at sweets, you can eat it." His voice sounded a little low, a bit more tolerant in not allowing rejection. "Thank you, you are such a good person." The little fox gave him a good person card every minute. Not far away, although Gong Yifei was chatting with others, he was always paying attention to the movement here. Seeing Bai Zioxi sitting down, a hint of joy appeared on his face. There was no need to hide his mind, he sent the little girl to the banquet just to please him. Perhaps in the eyes of ordinary people, his family background and his current status are already unattainable, but to be more real, he is still worse than a banquet, he is the person who is truly at the top. Gong Yifei knew very well that he wouldn't be able to join the banquet circle of friends if it weren't for the friendship of classmates when he was a teenager. Therefore, when he learns that the other party is having troubles now, he will be more concerned than the person involved, and when he meets a suitable candidate, he will immediately send it over. Seeing him looking over there frequently, others noticed and followed him, and he was immediately shocked. "Who is the little girl sitting next to Xingzi? When did you come in? I haven't seen it before. The little girl is young and has good eyesight. With so many of us, she chose Lao Yan, so good eyesight. In fact, there are famous waiters standing beside other people who serve tea to the guests. These people just want to tease their friends." At the end of the tea show, the headlights in the room turned on. The field of vision was suddenly bright, and Bai Zioxi blinked with a small spoon in his eyes. The eyes of everyone in the room were on her, but she slowly turned her head to look at the banquet. This time he finally saw him clearly. His shoulders are wide, he wears a silver grey suit, his cuffs and buttons are meticulous, his hair is neatly combed, revealing a full forehead, his facial features are very three-dimensional, handsome and deep. His looks and aura give people a sense of oppression, and if there is a slight smile on the corner of his mouth, it gives him a little gentle temperament. Bai Zioxi looked and looked again. In the dimness just now, the trace of fierceness leaked in those eyes was no longer found at this moment. Maybe it was her illusion, the little fox thought. He gave her cakes, he looked like a good person. 003 Yan Xingzi is the old son of his parents. There was a eldest brother above him. He died when he was 10 years old and then gave birth to him. The parents did not dislike him, but they had a deeper relationship with the child before, and they lost that child again, so the pain was unforgettable. Since childhood, Yan Xingzi has been compared with his elder brother. No matter his performance is good or bad, he can always hear the words "if your eldest brother is still." Therefore, when he was a teenager, he naturally rebelled. He smoked and drank, quarreled with his parents, played with a group of incompetent people, and spent a year or two. I wonder if the rebellious period has passed, or he felt boring, and started to learn again. Playlike and formed a game company with a few peers, and went to study abroad with top grades. During his studies, the game company became bigger and went public. When he returned from school, he gradually took over the family business. By now, he is already a banquet. The real power of the family. Whenever I saw him, he was always in a suit and leather shoes, with a gentle and steady appearance. Only a few friends knew that he was crazy too. And although his relationship with his parents is no longer contradictory, it can't be said to be close. His parents are old. No matter how high-spirited, youthful and beautiful you have been, you have to bow your head to time. When a man is old, he wants to reunite his children and grandchildren, but after so many years of banquets, he hasn't been found, and his parents are anxious but dare not urge him. They have realized their mistakes in the past and want to ease the relationship with their children, but every time they look at the perfect smile on their son's face, they can't do anything about it. Banquet stop is also one day when he suddenly realized this. He saw his parents with pale hair, heard his mother whispering in tears at night, and saw them talk about other people's children and grandchildren with admiration. He thought, it turns out that they are so old. There was some pity in his heart. It may not be related to family affection, it seems to be out of merciless feelings about the years, but this matter is indeed in his heart. He has been single for many years and has not deliberately searched for it, nor has he deliberately refrained from it, but he has never thought about anyone. His friend found out and joked, "Otherwise, you can find someone who is obedient, and take it back to show your uncle and aunt." After waiting for a year or two, he will say that his feelings are weakened, and then see you later. The speaker was unintentional, and Gong Yifei was mindful when he heard it. All of them knew that Yan Xingzi didn't plan to marry, and he did have the capital that didn't need to be married. If this is the case, there is no need to find someone with the same family background, because in this way, the matter of two people will sooner or later become the matter of the two families, and then become the matter of the two groups, and he has always been impatient to separate official and private matters mixed together. If it's just for parents to feel at ease, find a well-behaved and obedient person with a simple and clean background that will save a lot of trouble. When Gong Yifei saw Bai Zioxi, he felt that this little girl was suitable. She is well-behaved, beautiful, and she goes to a good school, which shows that she is not a pure vase and has a bit of connotation. There is no one at home, there is no drag, and there will be no worries about breaking up in the future. The important thing is that the person is so coincidental in front of him, and the timing is so good, it seems to be prepared for this. Yan Xingzi got up to smoke, and Gong Yifei followed. Come on, what do you think of that little girl? He got straight to the point. Yan Xingzi lowered his head and lit his cigarette, raised his eyebrows and glanced at him. How about what? Gong Yifei smiled and said, please be your little girlfriend, and bring it back to meet your uncle and auntie. They were talking and laughing, and you followed suit. Yan Xingzi's tone was not cold or cold. Seriously, you think about it, and people have seen it. He looks good and good-tempered. He is still a student of S, and I came to say today that I want to do a part-time job and earn some living expenses. Yan Xingzi exhaled a puff of smoke, his eyes narrowed slightly in the smoke, wondering if he was really thinking about it. Gong Yifei continued, I read her resume and learned about her family's situation. Her parents had gone in a car accident a few years ago. The little girl was admitted to university on her own and had to earn tuition. It is not easy. I don't want to recruit her. Well, if she accidentally went to another unclean place, wouldn't it be a pity? You can tell by the look in her eyes. It's simple, she doesn't understand anything. The banquet was like a smile instead of a smile. It sounds like you are doing charity. Don't make fun of me, Gong Yifei laughed at himself, I am not the emperor who is not in a hurry. Yan Xingzi smiled again, still not saying good or bad. Gong Yifei didn't say much more interestingly. He did everything that was supposed to be done, and it depends on what he meant. When Yan Xingzi was seated again, Bai Zioxi could smell the tobacco on his body. It is a faint, a bit unique mellow, and the specific taste is beyond description. The cake has been eaten, and the tea is brought to the coffee table. She has nothing to do, and she can't talk to others, so she concentrates on distinguishing the taste. I saw her twitching her delicate nose from time to time. It seemed that after some careful taste, she nodded and shook her head again. The movements were very small. She was playing there by herself, except for the banquet close to her. No one else noticed. On such occasions, she can still entertain herself, and the banquet can't help but think of what Gong Yifei said just now. She does have attractive capital, and she does not understand anything. Perhaps someday, this pure white lamb will stray into the wolves, ignorant of the innocence, not knowing that the surrounding beasts are already ready to move, especially kicking and playing around, having to wait for the fangs to fall on the neck, the blood spattered on the white fur, only to realize the wailing, and then begin to struggle, doing the last useless work. Yan Xing calmly imagined. Bai Zioxi glanced at him suddenly. Her eyes were black and white, and she looked good when she lowered her eyes. She lifted the corner of her eyes as if she was wearing a hook. She smiled at the corners of her mouth, her expression was triumphant, showing off, as if she knew a secret that no one else knew. What can she know? Without him asking, she couldn't help herself, and said softly, your cigarette smells a bit sweet. This is true, his smoke is full-bodied and full of roasted sweetness. And then? Bai Zioxi didn't say anything anymore, just looked at the empty cake plate and then at him. Her logic is simple, he even smokes sweets, but he just told her that he didn't like sweets and gave her the cake. What a good person! It was written in her eyes. Understand her meaning, the banquet stopped dumb. He really doesn't like sweets. It just happened that the cake was placed in front of her. Seeing that she was staring at her, wanting but not daring to ask for it, he gave it to him, and then he met a begging kitten and fed it one reason to order food. Bai Zioxi thought that he was right, and became embarrassed, her long eyelashes drooped, and the smile on the corner of her mouth also had a sense of shyness. She ate what others liked. This is not what a polite little fox should do. If the master knew it, he would also say about her. Thinking of master, who didn't know where she was now, the smile on her face faded, her thin eyebrows were slightly frowned, and her round eyes were covered with a light sorrow. She clearly remembered that she had just slept. How come hundreds of years have passed since she woke up, and the world has changed so much? Where is the master? Yan Xingzi saw the change in her expression on her face. He didn't realize that this night, he had put too much attention on this strange girl. Halfway through, Gong Yifei left the room and gestured to Bai Zioxi to let her go out together. When he went outside, he said, "You have also seen that if you are a waiter, you need to be here all day. The tea master is not needed. However, the salary during the training period is relatively low, which may not meet your needs." After he finished talking, he paused for a while, giving people time to react, and then said, "But I can introduce you to another job. The gentleman who gave you the cake just now needs a personal assistant. The main job is to pretend to be his girlfriend. To deal with the elders, you think about it, the salary is definitely enough for your college expenses." Although the banquet hadn't agreed yet, Gong Yifei estimated that the matter had already become more than half, and at most he would push it forward. For Bai Zioxi, this Mr. Gong is a great assist. Even better than herself, she tried to push her to the target. She pretended to think for a while, and nodded sharply in agreement. At the end of the night, Gong Yifei delivered the banquet to the parking lot, and Bai Zioxi followed at his sign. When Yan Xingzi got into the car, Gong Yifei jokingly pushed Bai Zioxi, "Why don't you know how to follow? I boasted that you have better eyesight. I told the little girl about that job. If they agree, you just don't hesitate." Bai Zioxi glanced at him, and then at the banquet in the car with an indistinct expression. He moved 2 steps forward and slowly got into the car. The car ran smoothly in the dark. The driver didn't say a word in front. He leaned on the back of his seat, elbows on the window, and fingers against the eyebrows, as if he was closing his eyes and resting. The street lights outside the car gradually moved back. The light on his face was bright and dark. Bai Zioxi was sitting on the other side of the back seat, next to the car door. She thought with some distress, "Is this a successful hookup? It seems not yet. I have eaten his cakes." She feels that she loves him. When will he love her? Alas, troubles. Sure enough, love is not that simple. Speaking of, just before getting into the car, she found that this car looked familiar. It was the one she hit by her the other day. It turned out to be like this in the car. It was quite spacious. It had installed a driver, pretended to be her, and could still hold a banquet. Well, when did he open his eyes? The little fox probed his head to look at the layout of the car, and was caught by the owner of the car. Finding that Yan Xingzi looked at her, in such a dark place, Bai Zioxi's little timidity towards him seemed to appear again. "But, cannibalism, she can no longer see me if nothing happened, and I can't see you anymore. Do you want to sleep?" She racked her brain and thought of a topic. The banquet was mild, or in other words, he had always been so careless and gentle, a little sleepy. "How about you?" When he spoke, Bai Zioxi was not so timid, and yawned a little, nodded and said, "I am also sleepy. I usually fall asleep at this time. I heard that you are staying at school during the holidays and staying alone in a dormitory, aren't you afraid?" Yan Xingzi asked following her words. "It's a little bit, only a little bit." Bai Zioxi pinched the tip of his little finger with his thumb, expressing that he was really only so frightened. Yan Xingzi smiled, it's already pretty good. Bai Zioxi immediately became happy, bending his eyes and said, I have only been in the dormitory at night for these 2 days, and go to the supermarket during the day to do part-time jobs. That supermarket is very big and has a lot of food. When she first went there, she almost got lost in the high shelves. At night, she still dreamed that she snatched the supermarket as her fox den, and finally woke up with a forced smile. Of course the little fox would not mention such embarrassment. There was a time when there was no nutrition, but Yan Xingzi realized that he was not impatient, and the people who threw him around like a joke didn't bore him. He watched her talk about rising, his cheeks were flushed, and he didn't know what he was thinking. 004 Yan Xingzi moved out of the house very early and lived alone. The car drove over the road ambushed by Bai Zioxi that day, lined with phoenix trees, and quickly arrived at his residence. There was still someone awake in the room, who was the aunt who was taking care of him. After he moved out, Lin's wife followed him and continued to take care of his life. Yan Xingzi brought Bai Zioxi into the door, took off his coat and said, Sister Lin, please tidy up a guest room. He had some work temporarily, so he turned his head and nodded to Bai Zioxi, I still have some work. I'll talk about your business in detail tomorrow. You don't need to be restrained about what you need. Go to bed early and good night. After speaking, I went upstairs. Sister Lin couldn't tell whether she was surprised or happy, and stared at Bai Zioxi in a daze. Bai Zioxi also stared at her blankly, remembering to say hello, and then said shyly, Hello auntie, my name is Bai Zioxi, the stream of the stream, excuse me. Sister Lin suddenly came back to her senses, and greeted people with a smile on her face, don't disturb, come sit down, the name Zioxi sounds so nice. Bai Zioxi also liked her name, which her mother gave her. It is said that when her mother entrusted her to her master, it was a snowy day, the world was white, the birds and beasts returned to their nests, the sun and the moon were hidden, and everything was silent. Only the creek at the foot of Mingshan was still in the ice. The bottom is flowing forward happily, ding ding dong, they are always laughing, carefree. The mother said to the master, this child is called Zioxi. She was young and didn't remember anything. Wai Wei told her. What would Zioxi want to drink? There are fresh oranges and strawberries in the refrigerator. How about Anta squeezing a glass of juice for you? Are you hungry? Do you want to have a supper? The shrimp dumplings just made in the afternoon are fresh. She spoke a little fast, like poor beans. Bai Zioxi said dumbfounded, orange juice. Hey! Orange juice is coming soon. Lin Sao put the person on the sofa and rushed to the kitchen excitedly. Thank you auntie. Bai Zioxi spit out the second half into the air. Wife Lin moved quickly to bring out a glass of orange juice, and a fruit plate of strawberries and cherries, and said, the water is already burning. You can eat some fruit first. I'll go to the guest room to have a look. The guest room was cleaned frequently, and the bedding and pillows were all available. She confirmed that there was nothing left out, and went to the kitchen to watch the fire. A few minutes later, Bai Zioxi was sitting at the table eating dumplings, and politely stopped Lin's wife from continuing to move out of the refrigerator to eat. Although she loves to eat, she really can't eat so much. Banquets don't like lively activities, there are very few guests at home, let alone staying overnight, because Lin's wife is so enthusiastic. Moreover, after taking care of the banquet for so long, she had already selfishly regarded him as her junior. Seeing that he had been alone all these years, she was also secretly anxious, and she suddenly saw a little girl back with her, wouldn't she be too excited? If it weren't for worrying about the time being late or disturbing the guests to rest, she would definitely have to talk to each other well. Bai Zioxi asked Lin to feed her food before being taken to the guest room to rest. She was trapped in the soft bed, touched her belly, and sighed contentedly. 88, are you there? Yes, the system quickly replied, scanning the surrounding environment, and expressed surprise at the progress. "Are you already settled in the target's home?" "Not bad, well done, as expected from Ming Shan." Bai Zioxi was embarrassed to praise him. "Actually, I didn't do anything." Not only did he not do it, but he also ate other people's cakes. "I have to do nothing. The system is decisive, isn't it? The most deadly invisible sultry?" He opened his mouth and fooled. "You didn't watch those martial arts dramas. The real masters, martial arts turned to the realm, all have no tricks. That is amazing. Anyway, if you continue to keep it, let's strive for the next step." "Okay." Bai Zioxi seemed to understand. She was sleepy and couldn't think of such complicated problems. She rubbed her head against the pillow and yawned. "Good night." 8 or 8. She had a good sleep quality. She woke up early the next day, washed in the room, and found wife Lin earlier than her when she went out. In addition to Lin's wife, there are several other people in the room, all busy with the things at hand and methodically. Zioxi wakes up. "Are you hungry? The breakfast is hot. See what you want to eat." When Yan Xingzi went downstairs, she was still on the stairs, and she heard the voice of sister-in-law Lin's excessive warmth. "Zioxi, how about this custard bun? The custard filling is made by the family. Would you like some porridge? Drinking porridge for breakfast is easy to digest. Do you have shayamai? There are also crab ravioli." Seeing him come down, Lin Wei smiled and went to the kitchen to serve his breakfast. Bai Zioxi's 2 cheeks were round and swollen, trying to swallow, and greeted him softly, "Good morning." "Morning." Yan Xing nodded, and the room was warm. He didn't wear a suit jacket, only a smoky grey shirt. His hem was tied into the suit pants. He became more broad-shouldered and narrow-waisted, and his figure was tall and straight. "How?" Bai Zioxi nodded. "Very well, the bed is very soft, and the quilt is very warm." After a pause, he asked politely, "Did you go to bed late?" She remembered it was too late when she came back yesterday, and he still had work to do. "It's not too late." Yan Xingzi walked to the main seat and sat down. Sister Lin brought his breakfast, but didn't stop this time. She just smiled at Bai Zioxi, and went on busy. Bai Zioxi found that even though the banquet seemed very gentle, the people in the room didn't dare to talk and laugh at Will when he appeared, and they seemed to be a little afraid of him. In this way, it is normal for her to be timid about him occasionally. Everyone is like this. She is just following the crowd, not because of timidity. Yan Xingzi took a sip of warm water and saw that her eyes were round, and she didn't know what she was thinking. "About last night's proposal, let's go to the study room to chat after breakfast." "All right." After breakfast, Bai Zioxi followed Yan Xingzi upstairs to his study. Yan Xingzi asked her to sit across the desk, took out a document from the drawer that was not ready and said, "I will hire you to be my personal assistant. You can see the job content first." Bai Zioxi took it over and read it carefully. Although she had already understood the words, she still couldn't understand the meaning of some nouns right away, so she was a little slow to read it. Fortunately, there is a system that can help her check. In short, this is a labor contract. The banquet will only ask her to act as a partner in order to meet the elders in the family and pay her corresponding remuneration. In the car last night, he had a thought in his mind, maybe Gong Yifei's idea was not a bad idea. Since he is not bored, it is not unacceptable to follow the trend, maybe she can really help him solve some small troubles. After Bai Zioxi had read it, the contract seemed to her to be that she had to give her a place to live, food, and money after the banquet. There is no better person than him. She didn't have the slightest objection and immediately signed her name. Yan Xingzi also signed, saying, "If you have time, you can think about how to respond to possible inquiries from your elders. Another point is that this contract is a secret and cannot be disclosed to others." Bai Zioxi nodded repeatedly. After signing the contract, she went downstairs to inspect the garden, which is where she will work in the future. The garden at the end of the feast is not small. There is a large area around the iron fence. The walls are full of roses. Follow the iron fence to climb the wall. If you wait for the next spring, the flowers will fall down like a waterfall, it will be beautiful. In addition, there are many other flower species, even if it is winter, many flowers are in full bloom. When the banquet went out, Lin's wife was looking at the garden through the French windows in the living room, and smiled and said to him, "The kid from Zioxy knows how to keep good health," so he went for a walk after breakfast. Yan Xingzi took a look, and the figure in the garden appeared and disappeared between the flowers and trees. After Bai Zioxy patrolled the garden and returned to the house, Lin Sao discussed today's recipe with the chef in the kitchen. Seeing her coming in, Mrs. Lin came over and smiled and said, "We don't go home at noon. We decide what to eat for lunch. Is there anything Zioxy wants to eat?" Bai Zioxy said, "I eat everything. She is very easy to raise. Eat everything well, and be healthy if you are not picky eaters." Aunt Lin took her to the balcony, where refreshments were already set on the balcony table. Lin's wife had been holding back what she said last night, but today she finally had the opportunity to ask, "Zioxy, how did you meet Xingzi?" When Bai Zioxy heard this, Zindao had to start working now. She thought about it and said, "I met when I was doing a part-time job." She went to work part-time, applied for a waiter, and then Gong Yifei introduced her to work for the banquet. So, do a part-time job, get to know the banquet, there is nothing wrong with it. Part-time job? Sister Lin pitied her a little. "You are a student, so you can take a vacation so easily, why do you still have to work? Part-time job is pretty good, part-time job has money to buy milk tea." She took a sip of fruit tea and added, "Yan Xingji Ren is also very good. When we first met, he let me eat the cake he liked. Do you like to eat cake?" Auntie Lin blinked and thought to herself, "I have taken care of him for decades, how come I don't know that he has this preference? Is it the way to coax the little girl?" In the afternoon, Bai Zioxy Cat is watching TV on the sofa. Yan Xingzi said, "Let her think about how to deal with the questions of her elders." She discussed with the system, it was nothing more than fabricating the process of their acquaintance and love, and her personal situation. Bai Zioxy racked his brains and didn't compose any decent love content. However, although she can't, she is easy to learn. So I turned on the TV and watched the idol drama, with the notebook beside me, ready to study. She has always been serious about work. When the evening banquet was over, she had already taken a page full of notes. Wife Lin took over the banquet's overcoat and whispered, "Zioxy took a notebook to scribble all afternoon. I don't know if I'm doing homework, but I'm serious." She didn't even dare to call her to eat. Yan Xingzi looked up, only to see her slightly fat profile face, her lips pursed, her cheeks slightly bulging, and her eyes staring at the screen, very serious and focused. He followed her gaze to the TV, as if afraid of disturbing others. She turned the volume down, and at this moment only saw an actor holding the actress's shoulder and saying something hoarse, because he couldn't hear it. The voice seemed a little funny. Yan Xingzi walked to the back of the sofa, took a condescending look, and saw that she was holding a pen in her hand. Her writing was delicate and small, and she was written neatly on paper. Bai Zioxy finally noticed someone behind him, and when he turned around to see him, he immediately smiled and said, "You are back." Yan Xingzi nodded gently and asked, "Winter vacation assignments arranged by the school?" "I'm studying." Bai Zioxy showed him the notes as if offering a treasure, and made sure that Lin was not nearby, and then whispered, "Didn't you make me think about it, but I can't think of how the two fell in love. I have to learn from the people on TV." Yan Xingji condensed his eyes and looked closely, and the densely memorized in the notebook, it really was the actor's pursuit of the heroine, or the two people passed by. Even Bai Zioxy was very considerate and changed the names of the heroes and heroines to the two of them. So he saw something like this. Yan Xingzi gave Bai Zioxi 9,999 roses, and said to her, I want people in the whole city to know that today's roses have been contracted by you. Yan Xingzi took Bai Zioxi to the movie, wrapped up the audience, and asked her, do you like what you saw? The banquet set off fireworks for Bai Zioxi by the river, and confessed affectionately, the stars are in your eyes, and you are in my heart. Yan Xingzi and Bai Zioxi. The banquet stopped. Yan Xing stopped, his forehead suddenly beating, and for the first time he found that maintaining a decent expression was such a difficult thing that he almost couldn't recognize his name. 005 Bai Zioxi showed him the results of his hard work in the afternoon. Waiting for his response, he asked with credit, how is it? I just started learning. It will be better when I learn more. How about it? Grandiose. Naive. Yan Xingzi is rarely judged in his heart harshly. He took a deep breath, confiscated the notebook decisively, and said sincerely, no need to do this, it can be more ordinary. Seeing his reaction like this, Bai Zioxi bulged and said a little faintly, but I don't know how commonplace is. Yan Xingzi wanted to give some advice, but found that he had no experience at all, and his friends, once there were some people around, they seemed to be sending the house and the car. In their current situation, these didn't work. Wife Lin came to inform that dinner was ready, but found that the two were silent and facing each other. Bai Zioxi's expression was still a bit low. He thought they were upset, so he hurriedly stepped forward to relax. It's time for dinner, let's eat first. Zioxi stays at home. After a day, you have to accompany her after dinner. No matter how busy you are at work, you have to accompany your girlfriend. Zioxi, right? Hey! Bai Zioxi didn't hear her clearly, and nodded subconsciously. Upon seeing this, Lin's wife was almost smiling, because the banquet did not object. This is an admission, the little girl is his little girlfriend, and the two are in love. Oh my god, this is the best thing she has heard this year. Looking at her expression, the banquet is clear, but at most tonight, everyone who should know will know the news. And now he began to doubt that hiring the girl in front of him to pretend to be his girlfriend is really not a ridiculous decision made when his head is hot. Thinking of the densely packed love secrets in his notebook, he didn't want to admit that he was born in a cold sweat. After dinner, Banquet Xingzi wanted to go to the study and work, but Lin was forced to rush to the garden to let him go for a walk with his girlfriend. For so many years, Lin's wife is very prudent most of the time, so occasionally she is resolute once or twice. As soon as he stepped into the garden, his mobile phone rang. It was his private number. Only a few people had numbers. When he took it out, his mother was calling. It was not surprising. Mom! Stop it, have you eaten? Su Yingru's gentle voice came from the other end. Eat, where are you and Dad? I have eaten too, are you busy lately? Yan Xingzi looked forward, Bai Zioxi hopped ahead, stopping from time to time to look at the flowers on the roadside, touching the trees with buds that are ready for spring. He said, fortunately, it's the end of the year, and you can take a vacation soon. Su Yingru said hurriedly, if you're not very busy, come back for a meal. Someone sent a box of crabs today. Your dad and I don't like it. When Yan Xingzi was about to speak, Bai Zioxi turned around and said to him happily, look, you see, this flower is blooming well. It was a camellia with a big bowl, with red petals layered on top of each other, still blooming in such a cold season. Su Yingru heard it too, paused, and tentatively said, if you have friends, you can bring them back together. Her tone even sounded a little cautious. The banquet was silent for a while. Seeing that he hadn't passed, Bai Zioxi ran back and was about to call him again. When he arrived, he found out that he was on the phone. He covered his mouth and opened his eyes round and round. She didn't know if she was bothering, she shook hands with gestures, let him ignore her, turned her head and ran away, Her back was like a cheerful deer. Stop! Su Yingru asked carefully. Yan Xingzi retracted his gaze and said, okay, just tomorrow night. Su Ying replied happily, well, 2 people. 2 people. Saying goodbye to the happy mother, put away the phone at the end of the feast, and strolled in the garden. Although this garden is beautiful, he seldom patronizes as a master, always coming in and leaving in a hurry. He crossed the flowers and trees and found the little deer under a hibiscus flower tree. Bai Zioxi squatted on the ground to collect the fallen petals, and when he gathered a handful, he lifted it upwards, and a heavenly girl scattered flowers. Yan Xingzi found that she was very good at self-entertaining herself. No matter what the occasion, she could be immersed in some subtle pleasures. However, thinking about agreeing to his mother and thinking about Bai Zioxi's so-called achievements all afternoon, he could only interrupt her happiness aloud. Come out with me. She squatted on the ground and looked like a small ball. When she looked back at him, her face was also small, only those eyes were still attractive. Where to? Yan Xingzi said, I'll find you some material. He couldn't really let her make up based on the content of the idol drama, nor could he put forward any effective opinions, so he had to go another way. He called the assistant and asked those invitations and admission tickets that he sent over recently, which ones are today, and which ones are suitable for taking the little girl to participate. Finally, I decided to go to a movie premiere, New Year's film. The director is his friend. The invitation letter has been sent long ago. The time is 9 o'clock tonight. He asked his assistant to send in the invitation letter, as well as some clothes suitable for Bai Zioxi. Lin Wei learned that the two were going out and said happily, young people have to go out for more walks, watch movies and listen to concerts. Which is more interesting than being at home? Bai Zioxi changed clothes in the room and came out. She was wearing a goose yellow down jacket. She was wrapped in it. She couldn't tell which was the waist and the breast. Now she changed into a fitted knitted skirt and cashmere coat. Although she has a slender frame, there is meat where there should be meat, and she is thin where there should be, and she has a very good figure. She also had a light makeup on her face, and she felt embarrassed at this time. Her cheeks were lightly flushed, her eyes were also glistening. She looked shyly and expectantly, and Lin immediately covered it. Heart. I can't stand it, she thought. At her age, when Zioxi looked at her, she was confused and stared, let alone stop. If she said that before, she still had some doubts about why the banquet would like a little girl, but now she has no doubts at all. If he didn't like Zioxi, Lu Xiaowai couldn't pass it. The people in the room also looked at her, and Yan Xingzi spoke first, with a concerned tone, you look good in this suit, do you feel cold? Bai Zioxi shook his head, it's not cold in the room. If you go out, there are cars going in and out, and you will enter the venue directly when you arrive. It shouldn't be cold. The premiere venue was not too far away from the banquet hall, so the assistant drove them over. The scene was very lively, there were reporters and celebrities. The two joined the audience. The first time Bai Zioxi came to such a place, her eyes were not enough. If it weren't for the banquet, she would walk by herself. Throw. Look at that person, she whispered to the banquet, I saw him on TV this afternoon. When she leaned over, Yan Xingzi smelled a very light fragrance, unlike perfume, it seemed to be her own. Looking at what she was referring to, he found that the actor was indeed a bit familiar, the one that was playing on TV when he came home in the afternoon, holding the heroine's shoulders and shaking with all his strength. He smiled and made a narrow comment, I remember him, he acted very hard. Bai Zioxi understood what he meant and snickered while covering his mouth. Next, Bai Zioxi saw a few familiar faces again. This is not surprising. The New Year film originally invited actors and celebrities who are familiar with the audience and who are very popular. The two were talking quietly, when someone suddenly greeted Yan Xingzi. Old Yan? It really is you. Is his director friend? When the banquet came here, he didn't plan to let him know, but he still didn't avoid it. He said helplessly, "Aren't you the protagonist tonight? How come you have time to sneak out?" Hao Ping'an caught Yuanzhuang with a look on his face and said, "What kind of protagonist I am? Everyone is busy watching Xiao Xianro, who wants to see me? It's you." He stretched his tone, looked at him and Bai Zioxi back and forth, teasing, "You, the big Buddha, came to my small temple. The little one is flattered." This can be said to be no joke. If Hao Ping'an is a friend of Yang Xingzi, his movie premiere invitation letter will not be delivered to Yang Xingyun's desk. With so many reporters on the scene, if the identity of the banquet is exposed, these people can swarm up. Fortunately, he has always been Loki, and ordinary people don't recognize him. "Don't tell me," Hao Ping'an said again. He didn't go to Gong Yifei's party that day, and he didn't know the identity of Bai Zioxi. The banquet simply said, "This is Bai Zioxi." "Zioxi, he is Hao Ping'an, the director of today's movie." Bai Zioxi looked at Hao Ping'an with surprise. "The director, hey, can make so many interesting movies and TV series, and she can't even make up a pretend to be in love." She greeted people with admiration, "Hello, you are amazing." Hao Ping'an was taken aback for a moment, then turned away, coughing dryly, "It's okay, it's okay." He winked at the feast, "Lian, where did you find the baby? Looking at me like this, I can't hold it." It's not that the brothers are not loyal, but the beauty is too charming. Yan Xingzi still smiled mildly, and Hao Ping'an didn't know what to do, suddenly felt a little uncomfortable, and he didn't care to tease his friends, and found an excuse to slip away. Bai Zioxi feels a little regretful, "I have a question and want to ask him." Yan Xingzi enlightened her and said, "Actually, you don't need to be too nervous. I don't go back to my parents' house very often, and you have to face them very rarely. When they ask, at most they only ask how we met, when to determine the relationship, and in some daily situations, you just need to clarify these things." He realized that he had been circumvented by her before, and he was obsessed with making up the love process. In fact, his parents might not ask so much. Bai Zioxi can't help but be nervous, eat his and wear his money and take his money. If she doesn't help him get things done, she will be a bad fox. She frowned and said distressed, "Then when did we determine the relationship? Can I say it was after watching the movie premiere? And we get along every day." As I talked, my voice gradually lowered and turned into a muttering to myself, "Surely you can't say that you go to work, I watch TV at home. Then we have breakfast and dinner together every day, and you will walk with me after dinner." Yan Xingzi was a little helpless. He originally just wanted to ask her to help solve a little trouble. Now it seems that the trouble is getting bigger and bigger. 006 The next day, the banquet stopped and went to the company. His assistant brought the stylist and makeup artist to the house. Bai Zioxi is like a spinning top, spinning around in the hands of these people. When the makeup artist put her makeup on, she kept saying, "Your skin is so beautiful, it's white and you can't see your pores, it's different when you are young." Bai Zioxi closed her eyes and let her scatter her fans, thinking to her, "My age can scare you all." Although she had just grown up in the demon world, according to the algorithm of human society, these people had to call her ancestor. Imagining the scene where Yan Xing stopped calling her ancestor, Bai Zioxi laughed out loud. The makeup artist also smiled and said, don't smile, the lipstick is crooked." Today's makeup is considered the simplest she has ever painted. The client's foundation is too good, so she only applied a thin layer of foundation, put on lipstick, and trimmed her eyebrows. Bai Zioxi changed into a new outfit, took his assistant's car to the banquet company, and waited for him to go to Yan's house together after get off work. In the car, Assistant Zhang gave her a mobile phone and said, "There are Yan Zong and my number in it. You can contact me if you have anything to do." "Thank you." Bai Zioxi took it happily. She was always curious about the mobile phone. She played all the way, and when she got out of the car, she finally successfully downloaded the star game. The banquet ended in a meeting, and Bai Zioxi waited in his top-floor office, piercing the stars with joy. Good. Unbelievable. Yang Xing stopped pushing the door and came in, just in time to hear the sound of the game from her mobile phone, and the two subordinates who followed him paused, and couldn't help but wonder who was so bold. The big boss didn't give them a chance to solve their puzzles, so he stopped at the door and said, "Let's do this first, and I will discuss the points mentioned in the department." Okay. The subordinates had no choice but to leave with growing curiosity. After Yan Xingzi turned around, Bai Zioxi had put away the phone and looked like a good baby. "Are you still busy?" "It's over," Yan Xingzi nodded to her. "I've been waiting for a long time." Bai Zioxi waved his hand with a guilty conscience. "I didn't wait long." In fact, she still feels that time is passing too fast, and the game hasn't played a few rounds. "Thank you for the cell phone you bought me." "It should be." Yan Xingzi pressed a button on the desk, only a slight mechanical turning sound was heard. The two hidden doors on the wall retreated to both sides, revealing a row of top cabinets with watches and cufflinks in the cabinets. The tie clip was shining, and there were a few straight suits and a long row of ties hanging on the side. Yan Xingzi removed the watch on his wrist and replaced it with another one. Bai Zioxi was stunned. It's not that she has never seen the world. She used to play with the big thumb pearls as marbles on Mingshan. The multicolored gems were smashed and ground into powder to make paint. Master's private library came and went freely. What kind of treasures she had never seen before. In her opinion, those are not as fun as a snow in winter. Young and ignorant. Now I know that making money is not easy. She leaned over, looked at the jeweled cabinet, then at the banquet, and sincerely praised, "You are so rich." Yan Xingzi looked down at her, her black and white eyes looked more pure and transparent under the light, with nothing but praise but no greed. He smiled and said, "If you are fancy, you can tell me. I have money too." Bai Zioxi pointed to her bag. There was a card in it, which was also handed over by Assistant Zhang today. The money on the card was the salary stated in the contract and was paid once a month. Taking into account her situation, Banquet Xingzi paid her 1 month's salary in advance. She counted, and said calmly, "It's only 5 figures, which is enough for her to buy a super large cup of milk tea 3 meals a day." The system suddenly popped up and said, "Your money is enough to buy a small piece of his watch strap." Bai Zioxi decided to unilaterally cut off communication with the system for 1 hour. Before it was time to get off work, when she followed the banquet to leave, she passed the secretary's office next door, turned her head and glanced curiously, and finally faced 3 or 4 more curious faces than her. If nothing happened, she turned her head back and continued to walk forward, hearing deliberately suppressed comments from behind her ears. "I saw it, it's true. I just said it was true. I saw Assistant Zhang lead people in before, but you still don't believe it. It looks so young, is it a relative's child? When will you see your relatives and children come into our big boss's office? A bet on a lipstick is the future boss. It looks so good, prettier than a celebrity. The big boss must have a good vision." Bai Zioxi looked at the face reflected on the elevator door and nodded in agreement. "Your eyes are also very good. This face looks like 99% of her own, with only subtle differences. To praise her for being beautiful now is not just to praise her herself." Yan Xingzi glanced at her, only as though she hadn't seen her small movements. The car drove out of the city and turned onto the winding mountain road in the suburbs. After a week, the front suddenly opened up and a big house with a garden appeared. The garden looked larger than the Yangxingzi residence, and the gardening style was more natural. Bai Zioxi also saw several free-growing fruit trees. After getting out of the car, walking into the house, someone handed slippers, took the bag in her hand, and turned around in the hall, and there were 2 people in the living room, who seemed to be the parents of the banquet. Dad, Mom, Yan Xing stopped speaking, his palm supporting Bai Zioxi's waist. This is the stream. Bai Zioxi is an agitated spirit, subconsciously standing back. Does his heart want to start acting? She hurriedly bent over to say hello, uncle and auntie. When they walked in, Su Yingru couldn't sit still and stood up. Although I have heard Sister Lin say that the young girl brought back by her son, she was still a little surprised when she saw the real person. Seeing her face is so tender and her voice soft, she is really small. Come on. Su Yingru hurriedly waved to the two of them. Is it cold on the road? Bai Zioxi sat with Yan Xingzi, shook his head and said, it's not cold, it's warm in the car. Su Yingru said kindly, I told Xingzi that I wanted to see you, and it was cold and asked you to run. As a junior, I should have taken the initiative to visit you and uncle. I was rude. Bai Zioxi responded decently, and gave her a look at the banquet. It was a little surprised. Is this still the girl who jumped like a deer yesterday? Perceiving his gaze, Bai Zioxi raised an eyebrow and glanced at him, with pride written in his eyes. For these few words, she prepared for an hour last night. It is useful to memorize it according to the template. The feast just felt funny. Seeing the eyebrows between the two, Su Yingru couldn't help but glance at her husband Yan Hongzhong. It seemed that her son was really concerned about the little girl. Yan Hong, who had never spoken, coughed and said, ask the children what they want to eat and let the kitchen do it. This seemed to say to Su Yingru, but the actual question was Yan Xingzi and Bai Zioxi. Bai Zioxi said quickly, I'm not picky eaters, I can eat everything, thank you uncle. She said that she secretly looked at Yan Hongzhong curiously. Yan Xingzi's facial features were obviously more like her father, but the old man looked more serious, and Yan Xingzi always made a little smile, which made people feel gentle. But what this serious old man said is very kind. She thought she was looking very secretly, but in fact, the three of them were not easy to fool around, and they all saw her little movements. There was such a feeling as expected in Yan Xingzi. Her dignity and stability only lasted less than 3 minutes. Su Yingru's smile deepened. Yesterday, she heard the little girl's voice through her son's cell phone. She was very innocent and lively. When she first had a conversation with her, it was like a child holding on to an adult's clothes. It was always a little peacekeeping. That's it. Yan Hongzhong coughed again, picked up the newspaper he had read on the coffee table, and looked at it again intently. Su Yingru smiled and said, I'll go to the kitchen to have a look, and I will accompany Zioxi to see home. Yan Xing nodded, and led Bai Zioxi out of the living room. When they walked away, Su Yingru said to Yan Hongzhong, looks like a good boy. They have already learned about the situation in the little girl's home. Despite the misfortune, the girl is not crooked, which is very rare. Of course, for a family like them, there could have been more and better choices, but they couldn't be the master of their son at all, and they could only do what they liked. Yan Hong muttered, I'm too young. Standing with his son, like a generation away, from the perspective of an old-fashioned person like him, he always feels that his son is not serious enough. Looking at Young, she is actually 20 years old, but her face is tender. Su Yingru said. That's one round too. Yan Hongzhong snorted. Su Yingru ignored him and made the old man slowly awkward. She was going to tell the kitchen to add vegetables to the children. On the other side, Bai Zioxi followed the banquet and went to the flower room. Seeing that there was no one around, she immediately smiled and asked, I just behaved okay. Yan Xingzi smiled and nodded, without telling her that she had been exposed. I checked a lot of information last night, and it was really useful. The little fox was complacent, and then patted his chest. Xi said confidently, don't worry, I promise to help you complete the task. What can I do with the banquet? Ken only continued to smile and nod. It was very windy outside and did not go to the garden. The two of them went around the house and just happened to have dinner. Bai Zioxi still sits next to the feast. As she said, she is not picky at the slightest. She eats all broccoli or carrots, or conch crabs. In contrast, the banquet is not enough. He does not eat onions, beans, and everything with shells, but he eats shelled shrimp and crab meat. Before at his own home, Lin's wife knew his preferences. She never cooked beans. Shrimp and crab were also made into shrimp dumplings and crab ravioli, so Bai Zioxi didn't notice him being picky eaters. Today, Su Yingru sacrificed her son in order to take care of Bai Zioxi, and she discovered the problem. You are so picky. Bai Zioxi talked to Yan Xingzi in a low voice. She was really surprised. Because she felt that Yan Xingzi looked particularly reliable and stable, as if it should be omnipotent, but he was picky eaters. Yan Xingzhan glanced at her and motioned with his eyes. What? Nothing. Bai Zioxi said, she was just surprised. Yan Xingzi was slightly surprised, thinking she was going to persuade her to be picky eaters. Bai Zioxi has no time. He has grown up so picky eaters, and he hasn't seen any developmental problems. Why should he persuade him? It's better to eat more by yourself. Seeing that her appetite is so good, Su Yingru couldn't hold back a smile on her face. She just thought this little girl was so sweet. After the meal, Yan Xingzi accompanied Yan Hongzhong to play chess, and Bai Zioxi chatted with Su Yingru. After chatting until the banquet was a child, Su Yingru simply went to the room and brought out the photo album for her to see. The thick album is specially prepared for the banquet and records his journey from being a small beanie to an adult. Bai Zioxi was surprised again, because the banquets when he was a child turned out to be a cool guy, with a small face, and he didn't give half a smile. When he was 15 or 6 years old, he didn't pretend to be cool. He burned his head. She giggled. Yan Xingzi sat not far away, glanced back, and shook his head helplessly. After the photo went on, he gradually became the perfect smile on his face all the time. Bai Zioxi had to admire that human beings are so complicated. There have been so many growth and changes in just 30 years. 30 years is still just a cub for their monster race. Later, Yan Xingzi and Bai Zioxi were about to leave. Su Yingru sent the two to the door and told the banquet to remember to take Bai Zioxi home more, and bring her back during the Chinese New Year. The car drove forward and turned a bend, and the big house behind it was invisible. Bai Zioxi retracted his gaze, and just about to speak, suddenly remembered something. By the way, my aunt gave me this just now, saying it was a meeting ceremony. She took out a wooden box from her bag, which had not been opened before, and passed it directly to Yan Xingzi. The banquet did not answer, and said, I gave it to you, you just keep it. No. Bai Zioxi didn't want it. The thing for the banquet was because she wanted to work for him, so she couldn't ask for it as a gift from Su Yingru. Yan Xingzi opened it and looked at it. It was an emerald bracelet. He handed the box back to Bai Zioxi and said, the elders gave you a meeting gift. I want you to wear it with you. You gave it to me. What will she wear next time? Bai Zioxi thought about it. It seemed like this, so he had to accept it, and said, then I will keep it for the time being, and I will return it to you later. Putting the box into the bag was a solution to a worry. She took out the phone, looked at the banquet, mute the volume, and happily began to eliminate the stars. However, although she loves to play, she is very skillful. She can only play the first few levels for several times. Once the target score increases, she can't get through, and can only frustrately jab. Before she started, Yan Xingzi suddenly said, don't move there. Eliminate the two horizontal pieces in the upper left corner. Bai Zioxi poked obediently, then looked up at him, looking forward to the next step. What then? He pointed another step. Bai Zioxi continued poking, then what? Yan Xingzi is just a little bit of obsessive-compulsive disorder, I can't stand her blindly poking the stars of various colors into a mess. As a result, it seems that she has fallen in love with it, so she has to guide from beginning to end. In the end, most of the stars of other colors were eliminated. The red stars were connected into a large area. Bai Zioxi spoke with excitement, and his score instantly increased by several thousand. The screen was full of exploded fireworks. Awesome, you are so amazing. She stared at him, her small eyes full of worship. As long as you make a good estimate, you can do it too. Yan Xingzi smiled lightly, and admitted not so frankly that the look in her admiring eyes really made people enjoy a little bit of enjoyment. 007 On the second day after I ate with my parents, after the feast, I flew to another place for a business trip. Bai Zioxi nestled on the sofa with a fruit plate prepared by Lin Lin, with a pillow in her arms, and Animal World was broadcast on TV. She watched it with an old-fashioned emotion. It's not easy. When an animal is eaten, it's a human being. I have to work hard at the end of the year. No, this year, the vixen has to work part-time. The system cuts in. Bai Zioxi felt that Baba became more and more annoying. However, although it is not easy for people who work, those who take a break do not seem to be very comfortable. I just watched TV for a long time, and I couldn't stand it for any reason. The game of eliminating stars, because no one was instructed and couldn't predict, so I couldn't get high scores. When I went out to play, she was discredited. Bai Zioxi held his chin and thought sullenly, it seems that big money is not easy to make. At that time, she was a salesperson in the supermarket, and she was not as boring as she is now. Finally, the system reminded her that she still had a student status, so she bought online lessons online and went to listen to the teacher's lecture. That night, Bai Zioxi got out of bed to drink water, and suddenly heard movement at the door. He came out with a cup of water. It turned out that the banquet had come back, and the assistant driver was behind him. All three of them were wrapped in chills. Seeing her, Yan Xingzi said unexpectedly, not asleep yet. Sleep, get up and drink water. Bai Zioxi glanced at the clock in the living room, at 2 o'clock in the morning. Yan Xingzi said to the two assistant drivers, you go back and take a rest at home tomorrow. When he got closer, Bai Zioxi noticed the imperceptible fatigue on his face. After thinking about it, she seemed to have nothing to do for him, so she had to disturb him less. She poured him a cup of hot water and said, I'm going to bed, so you can rest early. Thank you, good night. Yan Xingzi nodded. She returned to her room and saw him sitting on the sofa when the door was closed, looking up and drinking water. The backlit figure looked a bit deserted. Although he didn't get home until early in the morning, Bai Zioxi still saw the figure of Yan Xingzi at the breakfast table on time. Bai Zioxi took a sip of porridge, looked at him, took a bit of steamed buns, and looked at him again. I don't want to see the banquet as if I can't see it, is there something to say? That. Bai Zioxi said hesitantly, I want to move back to school, okay. She felt that there was no problem in moving away. After all, it was stated in the contract that Party B could live in Party A's home, but she didn't say for sure. But I don't know why, when she said it, she felt a little guilty. Yan Xingzi put down his chopsticks and looked at her gently, is it unpleasant to live here? Bai Zioxi waved his hand quickly, no. Actually, well, the fox can't stay in the den and wants to go out for a stroll. She used to run around on Mingshan all day long. It might be better if someone is accompanied and someone talks about it, but the system seems to be busy recently, and although Lin's wife is very good, she also has a lot of work, so it's not easy to always disturb her. Bai Zioxi seems to see that everyone's work is very busy. She is too idle. If she moves back to school, she can walk around, work part-time if she wants to work, study if she wants to study, live here, and go out with people. Say hello, I am afraid that Lin's wife will worry about coming back later, and I am afraid that they will increase their workload, so I always feel helpless. As for her goal of hooking up a banquet, she can't see each other every day when she lives here, nor can she see each other when she moves out. For the sake of freedom, don't care. Yan Xingzi probably understood what she meant. If you want to do a part-time job, you don't have to move back to school. There are few people during the vacation and the school is actually not safe. Otherwise, there is also a supermarket nearby. If you want to do a part-time job there, if you don't want to trouble. The driver at home only takes 2 stops as a bus, and there is no need to transfer. I remember that the supermarket's self-operated desserts are good. Bai Zioxi felt that the point of the problem did not seem to be part-time jobs, but his suggestion was good. The supermarket was enough to attract her. There were countless delicious desserts in the supermarket. But then I'm going to see if the supermarket lacks people for part-time jobs. Yan Xingzi smiled and said, it's missing. This residential area was developed by the Yanqi Group. Many nearby supporting facilities are also named Yan, including the supermarket chain, which is just a part-time worker. The supermarket is busy at the end of the year, and it will only be too crowded, not too many. Before going to bed at night, the system came out without beginning and ending. I thought you were guilty of lovesickness these past 2 days. What? Just when the banquet was not there, she was depressed, and the meal was not fragrant. Didn't it make him think that the little fox had a spring heart? The system thought that he had missed her eyes. She hadn't seen her at all before, so why did she fall in love so soon? The results of it? She is just a waste of money and wants to go out. A waste of expression. Bai Zioxi went out to work the next day. She wanted to take the bus by herself, but she happened to have to go to the company after the feast. Because she was on the way, she hitchhiked. She really likes this kind of place where there are so many delicious things, and she still sets a second small goal for herself in her heart. When she finds the master, she will open a supermarket. She was like a fish in the supermarket, and her performance was very good. She made 300 yuan in the first day, more than she had in another supermarket. She took the money she didn't cover, and bought a few pieces of cake, a few kilograms of strawberries, and finally 7 yuan in cash, and bought a small cup of milk tea. Excitedly carrying things to the platform and waiting for the bus, the phone dinged and Assistant Zhang sent a message, Miss Bai is off work? Mr. Yan is on the way back now, so I can pick you up on the way. So Bai Zioxi hitchhiked again. After returning, she invited everyone to eat cake and strawberries. Lin's wife was relieved and a little bit painful. Zioxi has been on a day's shift, please eat it all. Bai Zioxi said, you make money to eat it. When I went to work the next day and went out at the same time as the banquet, Bai Zioxi thought for a while, if she hitchhiked every day, what chance would she have to take the bus? So she categorically rejected the car and went to the embrace of the bus. Sister Lin laughed at the whole process. During the lunch break, Bai Zioxi received a message from Su Yingru, and the two exchanged numbers that day. Has Zioxi had lunch? Eat, where's Auntie? After chatting for a while, Su Yingru learned that she was working part-time in the supermarket. She didn't say anything. After putting down her mobile phone, she said to Yan Hongzhong a little worried, the kid from Zioxi sells milk in the supermarket. How did you move? The supermarket was crowded, and it was terrible if someone accidentally touched him. At the supermarket. Yan Hong frowned. Yes, you don't know the situation of her family, the tuition and living expenses must be on her own. Yan Hongzhong shook the newspaper, and said after a long time, does that kid know how to give her pocket money? It's really shameful to find so many people who don't know how to take care of others. Su Yingru hesitated and said, maybe it's because Zioxi doesn't want it. You know the girls nowadays are quite independent. Yan Hongzhong will not discuss how his future daughter-in-law will behave. He only focuses on her son. You find a chance to talk about him. also. Su-Ying-gru thought about how to speak. In the evening, the banquet stopped working overtime at the company, and Bai Zioxi continued to take the bus. After dinner, she listened to an online class in the room, and Mrs. Lin knocked on the door and brought an after-dinner fruit. Is the creek working hard? She didn't know that Bai Zioxi listened to middle and high school content. Bai Zioxi was a little embarrassed, and just said, dictated for fun. However, Sister Lin looked for her to work part-time during the day to earn living expenses, and at night she was racing against time to study. When she thought that she brought everyone food today, she felt even more distressed for the little girl. After returning from the banquet, wife Lin wanted to say a few more strokes, and finally said, "Stop, don't blame me for talking. I think so. Now young people are in love, although there is no stipulation on who must pay for whom, but one party if you are in difficulty, if the other party has spare capacity, give some help appropriately. On the contrary, it seems that the two are in a good relationship. What do you think?" The banquet stopped for a while and didn't understand what she was talking about. Upon seeing this, Lin's wife said again, "I mean Zioxi, working so hard, and having to take into account your studies, it's really distressing." Yan Xingzi nodded. He knew what Lin's wife meant, although he didn't know how she understood it. Obviously in her eyes, he was a stingy scumbag. Be patient and explain clearly to Lin's wife, persuading people to leave, and as soon as he entered the study, he received a call from Su-Ying-gru. After talking on the phone for a while, she finally said tactfully, let him be considerate and take the initiative to give his girlfriend pocket money, so that she can't be wronged. The banquet ends. 008 On the 29th of the 12th lunar month, the banquet ends and the holiday begins. Bai Zioxi also rested. In fact, she was not tired at all, but Lin Sao and Su-Ying-gru couldn't bear to think she was a little pitiful, and there was a banquet to persuade her, so she had to stop for a while. Su-Ying-gru called on the same day and asked her and Yan Xingzi to go to the banquet house one day in advance to celebrate the New Year. In previous years, the banquets were only returned on New Year's Eve. Although I have only seen it once, Su-Ying-gru has already figured out the character of the little girl in several contacts. She is a child who has not grown up and likes delicious and fun things. So she said on the phone that there is a reservoir near the house. Every year the fish on the New Year's Eve dinner table is fished by her family in the reservoir breeding area. This year's fish hasn't been caught yet. When she comes, you can call a banquet. She goes. I also said that dozens of strawberries in the flower room are ripe, and she can pick the freshest and eat them as soon as she comes. Also, she made a lot of jam at home a while ago, and she is preparing to make desserts in the past 2 days. Sure enough, Bai Zioxi got the bait, put down his phone and went to find a banquet. The banquet ended in the study. Although I took a vacation, I just didn't have to go to the company. Occasionally, there were some official business to deal with. His study, Bai Zioxi, seldom took the initiative to approach, just like before on Mingshan, where there were paw prints left by her. Only the master study, she did not dare to go in and make trouble, and she felt a sense of awe inexplicably. She squatted outside the banquet hall study room and waited, took out her mobile phone and started playing the game, but she stopped playing the stars, and instead connected 2 identical fruits together, as long as there were no obstacles between them. Can be eliminated. This kind of game that does not need to use brains, only tests eyesight and hand speed, she plays much easier. When Yan Xingzi opened the door and came out, she saw her sitting on the carpet against the wall, her legs crossed, and a white and delicate ankle exposed under her trousers. Are you finished? Bai Zioxi didn't look up, and moved his thumbs quickly, poking, and the game was over within 10 seconds, before raising his head and looking at him. When shall we go to Uncle and Auntie to celebrate the New Year? Tomorrow afternoon, what? He stood at the door with the study door half hidden, and Bai Zioxi glanced inward, always feeling that places like study heavy ground were darker than other places. Because you still have work to do today. She thought, if he is really busy, then don't mention the matter of going back for the new year in advance. Yan Xingzi had already guessed her thoughts, most likely his mother called her and asked the two of them to go back earlier. Although he guessed it, he didn't give a positive answer. Instead, he said, it's not even today's work. Some of them can be put in the next year, but now it's okay if you are idle. Check it in advance. When Bai Xiaoxi heard it, he felt that there was a play, so he stood up and said eagerly, well, you can let it go. Don't be so diligent. You have been working hard for a year. Of course you have to take a good rest when you are on vacation. The banquet was a bit funny, and he deliberately said, I think staying at home is considered a break. Then how to calculate it? Rest must at least throw away the work. You are like this is not called a rest anyway. Then what do you think I should do? Yan Xingzi asked. Bai Xiaoxi's eyes rolled around, and Sima Zai's heart was very obvious. For example, you can go fishing and pick strawberries. Yan Xingzi smiled and shook his head. Bai Xiaoxi thought he disagreed, and begged softly, can you do it? If we don't go, the strawberries will be overripe. Yan Xingzi looked down. When she begged, she unconsciously moved closer, her face almost touching his arm, her moist lips closed, and his black and white eyes reflected his figure. He nodded when he saw his reflection. Yeah. Great. Bai Xiaoxi jumped up excitedly, and ran away, I'm going to change clothes. Aunt Linear. We are going to the mountains to celebrate the new year, we are going to pick strawberries. Su Yingru was more happy than Bai Xiaoxi when he heard the news. You know, since moving out, the banquet only occasionally goes back to eat dinner on weekends and Chinese New Year holidays. At most, stay at home for one night on New Year's Eve, and leave the next day, alienated and polite, almost with them. Not like family. Now the situation has finally changed, even if the son just goes home a day earlier, the meaning is different. They packed their things and set off in the afternoon. The streets are crowded with people, cars coming and going, and many shops have big red lanterns hanging on the doorways, with characters of blessing and couplets posted, and the flavor of the new year is already very strong. The banquet house has also been dressed up, and red blessings can be seen everywhere, and the deserted house is a bit more cheerful and lively. When I was on the road just now, Yan Xingzi told Bai Xiaoxi that the people who celebrated here, in addition to their family of 3, there are other members of the Yan clan who are relatively close, and they will come back in the next few days. Then I see them, do you want to take the initiative to say hello? Bai Xiaoxi asked. She was a little worried, if 17 or 8 came at once, what would happen if she confuses who is who? Yan Xingzi shook his head lightly and said, I have a higher seniority. Except for some obviously older people, you can take the initiative when you meet them, and don't care about anything else. Yan Hong is a middle-aged person. Now he and an older sister, the aunt of Yan Xingzi, are left in the same generation. This aunt is in poor health and has been living in a nursing home for several years and will not go home during the Chinese New Year. But Yan Xingzi is an old man who looks young, but his seniority is not low. It can be said that in the family, younger than him, it must be his junior, and the older than him may not be his elder. Bai Xiaoxi nodded to express understanding. At home, Su Yingru was already waiting for them. After meeting and saying a few words, she took Bai Xiaoxi to see her room. She asked Lin's wife and learned that the two lived separately at home, so she arranged Bai Xiaoxi next door to the banquet. This house is obviously a few years old, and the decorative furniture has a heavy feeling. The bed in Bai Xiaoxi's room even has gorgeous bed curtains. Su Yingru said, these are all previous designs. Your uncle and I are getting older and don't understand the preferences of young people. The creek lives first, and we will ask someone to change it after the Chinese New Year. Bai Xiaoxi hurriedly said, now it is very beautiful. I see the retro style on the internet, but this room is not as good looking. I like it very much, thank you, uncle and aunt. Suyeongru smiled. The more she touched her, the more she liked this little girl. Although young, she was sensible and considerate. At the same time, she was full of energy and made people feel bright when she looked at it. After they settled the salute they brought, Suyeongru asked someone to take the fishing tackle and take the two to the reservoir. Although it is winter, the grass and trees on the mountain are still green and the birds are chirping in the forest. You can imagine how lively the mountains will be in the spring and summer. It is a dry season and there is not much water in the reservoir. Bai Zioxi followed Yang Xingzan and walked slowly down the shore until it reached a protruding big rock. Yan Xingzi put on a posture, hooked up the bait, threw out the fishing rod, and took a seat on the folding chair, and then waited. Bai Zioxi squatted and watched for a while, and was bored. Will you just wait? If the fish keeps not coming, when will you have to wait? Yan Xingzi smiled and said, or you can tell those fish to bite the hook quickly, and we can finish work sooner. Bai Zioxi was lost. In her memory, fishing was obviously not like this. I remember one time, when she turned into her original form and fell asleep by the lake, her tail drooped in the water. An ignorant fish bit her and bit off a pinch of her tail hair. She got angry and jumped into the water. The fish was thrown ashore, using its own weight to treat its body, and let out a good sigh. Although she was punished for cutting off the tail fin of the koi carp raised by her master, she always felt that catching fish was an interesting thing. She didn't know that she was just waiting here, so she was so happy before. Yan Xingzi had anticipated that she would be boring, so with a laid-back attitude, watching her frowned for a while, and pouted for a while, with an expression of how can fishing like this be fun? I'm cheated. I feel a little happy. Indeed, you shouldn't always stay in the study during vacation, and the scenery outside is pretty good. Bai Zioxi waited until she yawned and fell asleep, and finally a fish took the bait. She jumped up, happier than the fisherman. Caught it. You can go back. It took a lot of effort to put the fish into the bucket. Yan Xingzi bumped his hands, shook his head and said, it's a bit small. Hey! The smile on Bai Zioxi's face collapsed. Do you want to fish again? I think this fish is not small. You think it's so big, I can't even lift it anymore. In order to be able to leave early, she did not hesitate to lie. She obviously possessed the weird power to knock a car into the air, but she pretended to be weak and unable to lift a few caddies of fish. Really worked hard. Yang Xing stopped laughing, and finally spared her, took the bucket, and said, let's go back first, and let others catch another one later. Good, good. Bai Zioxi nodded repeatedly, vowing that he would never go fishing again. Fortunately, she liked the strawberry picking afterwards. The strawberries in the flower room were well taken care of. Although the number was not large, each one was bright red and full, which finally comforted the injured heart of the little fox. After dinner, Bai Zioxi walked with Suyeongru for a while. Because the temperature was a bit low at night, Suyeongru quickly asked her to go back to the room to rest. Recently, Bai Zioxi had to take online classes every night. Anyway, after school started, she would be a college student. You don't expect to understand what the teacher said, so you can learn as much as you want. Of course, you can watch some TV dramas between online classes. Although the homework she did last time was rejected by the banquet, she has not given up her plan to learn from TV dramas. She took out her mobile phone and realized that she didn't know the network here, so she had to knock on the door next door. Yan Xingzi opened the door, and it seemed that he had just finished the bath, wrapped in a bathrobe, with a few hairs on his forehead, which was very different from his usual appearance. Bai Zioxi glanced more curiously, and found that he was on the phone, so he closed his mouth. But he spoke first, "What's the matter? Help me connect to the internet." Bai Zioxi hurriedly handed over his mobile phone. Yan Xingzi picked it up, his cell phone was still in the call, and the voice on the other end of the phone came out, "Old feast? Old feast? How did I hear you talking to the little girl at night? Didn't you say that you were on the mountain? Did you take the little beauty home that day?" Sounds like that director, Bai Zioxi thought. The banquet stopped paying attention, connected the phone to her, and said, "Rest early and don't play the game too late." Bai Zioxi nodded obediently, but she wanted to learn, not play. Hao Ping'an said again, "Yeah, I have to rest earlier. We have known each other for so many years, why don't you tell me to rest earlier? I look down on my friends, my brothers have done it in vain." Bai Zioxi blinked and thought that although the director was very powerful, he was also quite talkative. She waved her paw with Yan Xingzi and went back to the room to study. Hao Ping'an was still pattering, and Yan Xingzi neatly hung up the phone. One night later, the next morning, the family members arrived at the feast one after another. Bai Zioxi lay on the balcony of her room and watched with the system as cars drive into the courtyard, and the people who got off and on the cars were all dressed up and full of style. However, she did not seem to see anything better than banquet. The system said, the target person is also in power as a family member. It is definitely not comparable to ordinary Zioxi me. As far as I know, there are not many people in the Yunji group who really have the surname Yan, and they all have real talents. Most of the banquet family members depend on the family fund to live on. They receive a small amount of pocket money every month and do whatever they want. If they want to join the group, they have to rely on their strength. Bai Zioxi nodded without understanding, so, Yan Xingzi is very strong. Then you need to ask, look at these people underneath, you have to look at his face to eat one by one. As he was talking, someone knocked on the door, and Bai Zioxi ran to open it, and found that the person they were discussing was outside. The banquet said, "The guest is here, do you want to meet with me?" Although he asked politely, Bai Zioxi didn't think of rejecting it. After all, this was her job category. Close the door and leave, walk through the corridor. Before going downstairs, Yan Xingzi suddenly said sorry. Bai Zioxi was surprised when he realized that his hand was being held. There was a distance between the two, but now they are also being pulled closer. Her hand was completely wrapped in the palm of the banquet, and it was close to the temperature of the other person, which felt a bit strange and a bit novel. She tried to move her fingers, her fingertips scratched in his palm unconsciously, and she was immediately gripped tighter. Bai Zioxi also became a little nervous and didn't dare to move. In the living room downstairs, there were a dozen people sitting or standing, all chatting and laughing. Hearing the movement and looking up, they saw a couple of good-looking couples, holding hands, walking down the stairs intimately. The voice and laughter suddenly stopped, and Bai Zioxi found that the expressions on some people's faces were a bit weird. Although they were not malicious, they were obviously not friendly. She thought, is it weird for Yan Xingzi to hold hands with her? Although she herself thought so just now, but outsiders thought so, it would be different. In her heart, she has a small book, and those who are close to her, she likes, even if she is her own, those who are not important are outsiders. Yan Xingzi's family is within her own range. Now, when outsiders are unfriendly in front of her, she is not happy. Since these people felt weird holding hands, she wanted to hold them. She also held the banquet with her backhand, but found that it was a little tired to hold it like this. Her hand was too small to hold him, so she simply opened her fingers and buckled with him. Yan Xingzi looked down at her. Bai Zioxi didn't notice. She only looked at the people downstairs, with the big heroine smile on her face that she learned from the TV series. It could hold the audience with the kind of inexplicable fighting spirit. Very strong. Yan Xingzi couldn't help but get distracted and wondered, did she learn any weird knowledge again? Su Yingru broke the silence and said with a smile, I forgot to tell you, Xingzi brought friends home this year. The others returned to their senses, and laughed one after another. Xingzi finally talked about friends, now everyone can feel relieved. The girl is so pretty, is she a local? What do you do at home? I haven't seen it before. It's a local, just an ordinary person. As long as the child likes it, the old man and I are not the kind of people who value a woman's family background. Su Yingru deserved it. These people couldn't find a breakthrough here, so they turned to Bai Zioxi and Yang Xingzi. In the final analysis, although they are barely a family, they have to break the interests of their own people, not to mention them. The Yanqi group was created by the grandfather of Yang Xingzi. After several generations, the people are still prosperous. Now that Yan Xingzhan is sitting in the family position, other people can only drink soup behind him. Among them, there must be some people who are unwilling to do so, but they are not as good as him, so they can only find supplements in other ways. In the past, the relationship between the banquet and the parents was normal, and the banquet was not ready to find a girlfriend after the age of 30. These were their reasons to comfort themselves. Look at him, what if he earns so much money, his parents are not close to him, look at him, all day long showing how capable he is, so alone, no wonder he is still a bachelor at the age of 30, look at him. Although no one dared to say it face-to-face, there must be someone who thought so in his heart. So, just now watching Yan Xingzi brought his girlfriend downstairs, it was obvious that they had lived at home the night before, and these people had the same expressions. As soon as Bai Zioxi and Yan Xingzi sat down, a woman in her 50s opened her mouth and said, Xingzi, my second wife hasn't seen you for a while, so I don't even talk to everyone about how we talked about friends. This is the wife of Yan Xingzi's second cousin. He himself ranks 6th among his peers and is considered the last. Yan Xingzi had a usual smile on his face. I mentioned it to my second cousin, maybe he forgot to talk to my second sister-in-law. As we all know, his second cousin and second cousin have a bad relationship. They have been separated for many years, and neither of them cares about each other. If it weren't for the divorce to score the property, the two would have gone on separate things. When Er Tang's sister-in-law heard it, her face was really bad. She turned her head and looked at Bai Zioxi, and said, is the little girl young, is she an adult? Bai Zioxi said politely, Auntie, I am already 20 years old. Before the second sister-in-law could speak, Yan Xingzi took a bit of indulgence and corrected her, you are old, you should call the second sister-in-law like me. Bai Zioxi quickly admitted her mistake obediently. Although she had a good attitude, her face became even darker. Next to him was a younger, Yan Xingzi fifth sister who said, didn't Aunt Xingzi just say that Xingzi your girlfriend is from an ordinary family? I think her clothes are all the latest models and the prices are not cheap. It seems that Auntie is humble. Bai Zioxi looked at Yan Xingzi hesitantly, this is its fifth sister. Oh, it turned out to be my sister. Bai Zioxi greeted sweetly, and then said innocently, more than this set of clothes, there are many new clothes and bags in my closet. I don't have much money at home, these are all buy it for me dear. She said that she was still shy, and leaned her head on the banquet shoulder. Yan Xingzi still had a smile on his face. If you look closely, you can find that the corners of his mouth twitch a little. He was already holding his forehead in his heart, and he didn't know what she had learned recently, and she hasn't revealed herself until now, and the combat effectiveness is quite strong. The fifth sister obviously didn't expect this answer, so she choked for a while and said, really, I misunderstood, thinking that young people nowadays like independence and fall in love. Everyone spends their own money. Bai Zioxi said with a smile, AA is very good, but I am still young and studying, unlike my sister who can earn money, so I have to let my dear take care of me. But it doesn't matter. He is older than me. When he gets old, I will take care of him. In this way, Bai Zioxi used his own strength to fight against the heroes, and made great achievements. Not only did the banquet stand with admiration, but also stunned the system. The system murmured, "I was wrong, I shouldn't underestimate you. Little fox, you are no longer the little fox back then, you are now the fox Niu Kalojing." Bai Zioxi didn't have time to worry about what he was thinking, and showed up in front of everyone, and Su Yingru let her and Yan Xingzi go out to breathe. Walking hand in hand to a clean place in the garden, there was no one in front of and behind. Bai Zioxi suddenly slumped in a chair, all his fighting spirit was gone, so tired. Those actors are really not easy. After dozens of episodes of the TV series, she just pretended to be unable to do it for a while. With a pleasant smile at the corners of his mouth, Yan Xingzi asked, "What TV series have you watched recently?" Bai Zioxi blinked, "I don't look very much anymore. She has to study hard, and she just misses it every day." Yan Xingzi did not pierce through, and he thoughtfully said, "Is it thirsty? I'll get you something to drink." Seeing that she was doing her best just now, she didn't even drink water. "Yes, I want strawberry juice, and get some if you have food." Bai Zioxi called him calmly. After the banquet went into the room, she slumped in a chair for a while, sat up again, took the flowers in the vase on the table and smelled it, bored with her fingers and counted the number of petals. "Your name is Bai Zioxi." A voice suddenly came from the side. Bai Zioxi looked sideways and saw that he was a young man and one of those people today. She remembered what Yan Xingzi had said, that those younger than him are juniors. Since they are juniors, then ignore them. She is righteous and ignorant of others. The visitor came over, sat on another chair, and said grinning, "My name is Yan Zekin, you are my uncle's girlfriend, then I will have to call you auntie from now on. By the way, isn't there a younger brother or older brother named Ziahe?" Bai Ziahe ha 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 ha. He said it was funny, and laughed to himself. He didn't know that Bai Zioxi's favorite was his name. The word Zioxi was left to her by her mother, and Bai is both the color of her original shape and the surname of the master. When she was on Mingshan, she had only a first name, but no surname. When she went down the mountain, the monsters of the same kind told her that in order to obtain an identity certificate, she had to have a name and a surname. When asked what surname she wanted, she said nothing. Bai Zioxi, in 3 simple words, closely related her mother and master, the 2 most important people to her, and herself, so she didn't like people making jokes about her name. Yan Zekin didn't notice it at all. After smiling, he said a little familiarly, "Are you an college student? What a coincidence, so am I, but I should be 1 grade higher than you. Seriously, I admire you. I was stunned when I appeared hand in hand with my uncle, okay? Some warriors dared to fall in love with my uncle. Perhaps it was from the intuition of some kind of small animal, just like the little timidity in Bai Zioxi's heart when he first saw Yan Xingzi. Yan Zekin was not afraid of anyone since he was a child, just like his uncle. Of course, he is not really a small animal, but some aspects are similar to small movements. He always felt that the man, the uncle, didn't seem to have too much human feelings, and the perfect smile on his face all the time was more like a mask. He even imagined that during the second period, he might not be a human at all, but an alien lurking in the crowd. His purpose is to rule and rule the earth. Perhaps one day, he will tear off his mask and reveal a strange face. Several times, he scared himself by himself and almost scared himself to pee. So, you can imagine how shocking the previous scene gave him. Bai Zioxi didn't bother to care about him at all. Her combat power was exhausted just now, and now she has insufficient energy, and she needs to feed in time after the feast. Yan Zekin was still saying, "You just talked to your second aunt and sister-in-law and you looked very good. I haven't seen a few more than they can say, you don't know Zekin, why are you here?" Yan Zekin was able to speak vigorously, and suddenly he heard the voice of the most feared uncle, which was like a duck pinched around his neck. After a quack, he stopped cooking. Yan Xingzi came over, holding a tray with a cup of strawberry juice on the tray, 2 freshly baked small cakes exuding sweet fragrance. He put the things down, first glanced at Bai Zioxi, which was a little faint, then turned to Yan Zekin, and still gently said, "Do you know Zioxi?" "No, no. I don't know." Yan Zekin was so excited by him, he waved his hand again and again, and quickly stood up. "I just watched my aunt sitting here alone and came over and talked." "Oh." Yan Xingzi sat down. "I remember you and Zioxi belong to the same school." Yan Zekin hurriedly said, "Yes, yeah, what a coincidence." He just said it by a coincidence in front of the future little aunt. I don't know why. When he said it in front of the little uncle, he felt completely different. What's the matter with the inexplicable sense of crisis? Yan Xingzi didn't say anything, turned around to look at Bai Zioxi, and saw that she took a sip of strawberry juice. Her eyes suddenly brightened, and then she ate the cake. Her face also lit up, as if she was charged. Yan Chensan stood on the side and wanted to leave, but the uncle didn't speak. He didn't dare to stray without permission, so he had to wait. Waiting until Bai Zioxi finished drinking half a cup of strawberry juice and eating a piece of cake, he seemed to have regained his energy. She stretched out her small hand, opened her mouth, pointed at Yan's achievement and complained to Yang Xingzi, "He bullied me just now." Laugh at her name. Fuck. Yan Zekin was stunned. 009 Yan Zekin felt that he was more wronged than Doi. Seeing his uncle warmly asked his aunt what was going on, he wanted to kneel down and say, "Beg grandma to raise your hand. If he is guilty, please let the law punish him, don't complain to my uncle. The cousin who offended my uncle last time is still on the African Project site, contributing to China-Africa friendship." Bai Zioxi took a sip of strawberry juice and said slowly, "He laughed at my name." After listening to the banquet, he looked at the banquet. Without waiting for him to speak, Yan Zekin quickly confessed, "Yes, I am uncivilized and rude. I laughed at my aunt's name. I'm sorry that I was wrong. I don't dare anymore." He has learned from the experience of being beaten since he was young. If he doesn't admit his mistakes, he will usually be beaten harder. If he admits his guilt straightforwardly, he will suffer less pain. Sure enough, the banquet did nothing but said, "Your father called me yesterday, telling you not to leave after the Chinese New Year, and live here, go to school after school, just to accompany your uncle." His father is the elder brother of the banquet hall, he is in a provincial post, and he never came back for the New Year. Yan's became a bitter face. He would rather his uncle beat him up than spend the rest of his vacation on the mountain. The colorful world under the mountain beckoned to him, and his uncle, his old man, is really too rigid and serious. "If there is nothing to do, please enter the house," Yan Xingzi said again. Yan Zekin hurriedly responded and slipped away. The uncle is the uncle, it is better to face the uncle than to face the younger uncle. He quickly built himself up. Waiting for someone to leave, Yan Xingzi said to Bai Zioxi, "I apologize to you for him." Bai Zioxi waved her hand. She was not a prudent person. Yan Zekin apologized and it was fine, unless the other party dared to commit the crime again next time, otherwise the matter would pass. Yan Xingzi smiled, got up and went to call his brother in the lobby, detained the man's son, and always wanted to say something. Some guests arrived in the morning, and after lunch, the rest of the guests also arrived. The brothers and sisters of this generation of banquets, except for the eldest, are all there, plus their spouses, children, children's spouses, and even grandchildren. Suddenly there are more than 20 people. Among them, his fourth cousin also brought his sister-in-law. This fourth cousin is also an unscrupulous person who has been married several times. Now this wife is 28 years old, 20 years younger than him. His wife's younger sister is said to have just graduated from a prestigious university, and came with her sister-in-law to send the new year. They do have the custom of sending the new year to their relatives, saying that they can grow taller in the coming year. It's just that this sister-in-law is already in her 20s, so it's hard to say whether she can grow taller. When people came, Bai Zioxi was upstairs. When she came downstairs later, she found that the atmosphere was not quite right, especially Er Tang's wife and others, with a good expression on their faces. Zioxi is big, right? We just have another famous college student here. Bai Zioxi was confused and followed what she said and saw a young girl who was quite pure and beautiful. However, she has no affection for the second sister-in-law, and if she doesn't want to pick her up, the young girl looks like a banquet, she doesn't care too much, so she just nodded to the other party and left. She didn't know, in the eyes of others, this was simply a banquet and pampering with no one else, and the villain had the power, it was too damning. Bai Zioxi just obstructed others' eyes ignorantly. Later, Yan Zekin ran over and told her what was going on. This kid didn't hold any grudges, he was just sued by Bai Zioxi in the morning, and he leaned over in the afternoon. He said mysteriously, I heard them say that the fourth aunt brought her sister here to introduce her to my uncle. Who? The little fox smeared the complicated relations of relatives in human society. It's the girl the second aunt said just now. Yan Zekin was a little anxious for her little aunt. The competitors had all come to the door, and she was so leisurely. Although he is afraid of his uncle, it is undeniable that a young, promising, handsome man like his is very sought after. Bai Zioxi thought about it seriously, and suddenly realized, you mean someone wants to introduce a girlfriend to Yan Xingzi? Yes. So hurry up and take care of my uncle. Bai Zioxi was instantly excited. She knows this question. She has seen this story. However, you have to go to the banquet and check it out first to see if he really doesn't plan to let that girl be his girlfriend. She wandered upstairs and knocked on the door of the banquet hall. As soon as the door opened, she said excitedly, someone wants to introduce you a girlfriend. Seeing her look eager to try, and thinking about her performance today, Yan Xingzi knew that she wanted to do something again. With a little funny helplessness, let people in. His room is an inner and outer room, which can serve guests outside and can also be used as a study room. Bai Zioxi leaned back on the dark sofa, dangling his calf, and asked happily, what do you want me to do? She always felt that she was eating his food and drinking his food, but she didn't really do much. She was not at ease with this salary. She finally started to be busy today. She must make the banquet feel that signing a contract with her is not a loss. Yan Xingzi poured her a glass of warm water, smiled and asked, do you want to take a break? See how she was sluggish in the morning, now she is energetic again? No need, Bai Zioxi patted his chest. The past me has passed, and now I am a brand new me. Now there is only one question, do you like that girl? If you like her, then forget it. Although she doesn't know how it feels to like someone, there are often stories of love at first sight on TV. I heard that liking this kind of thing is unreasonable. In that case, what are you going to do? Yan Xingzi seemed to be curious, and asked slowly. Bai Zioxi didn't even think about it, and said, then I have to go down the mountain and leave, and I can't work for you anymore, because you already have a girlfriend. Although her goal is to successfully hook up at the banquet, if people like others, there is no way. Yan Xingzi smiled, bowed his head and drank, and said, I don't need her to be my girlfriend. Then leave this to me. Bai Zioxi was confident. However, so to speak, she didn't find a chance to show off all afternoon. In the evening, Su Yingru told her that the New Year's Eve dinner was about to start, and she was ready to sit down with the banquet. Bai Zioxi went upstairs and downstairs and didn't find the banquet. He ran into the garden and saw him under a blossoming camellia tree. There was a girl in front of him. They were facing each other. Under the sunset, beside the camellia tree, the picture quite a bit beautiful. Bai Zioxi seemed to have been pressed the key, and immediately started working. The feast is over. She yelled and ran over. Others heard that she was angry and jealous, only Yan Xingzi could hear her excitement. When she got to the front, she said savagely, "Who is she? What are you doing here with her?" On the opposite side, Su Sitong was looking at her. The Su family was originally just an ordinary well-off home. Both parents were working class. Because her sister married a rich man, she now lives in a villa and her parents don't work anymore. Mother plays mahjong with a group of women all day, while father carrying the bird cage and strolling in the park every day. She followed her sister and brother-in-law several times in high-end places, only to know what kind of life the rich people are living, and she wants to have that kind of life. She knows that she is no worse than her sister, and that her education is better than her. There is no reason why her sister can, she can't. Through her sister's mouth, she knew that her brother-in-law was not surprised in his family, and did not even have real power, and that the real power holder of the Yunji group was still single. That's the Yunji group. Among her college classmates, a few of her students have successfully applied for the job, and all of them are very energetic, and seem to have embarked on the road to success. Seeing them showing off in the group, Su Sitong felt a secret sense of superiority in his heart. What kind of work is in the Jinyan group? She can only work for others for a lifetime. If she can. This kind of thinking is even more uncontrollable when I see the appearance of the man named Yan Xingzi in the family photo of my brother-in-law. She followed her sister to the banquet house, but in anticipation of joy, she learned that the other party brought her girlfriend back this year. Fortunately, she was just a little girl, with a very spoiled temper, except for being younger than her, she seemed to have no other advantages. Su Sitong doesn't think she is inferior to her. She looked at it, and smiled generously. Your name is Zioxi, isn't it? I just talked to Mr. Yan about you. Zioxi ignored her, just stared at the banquet. Why are you talking to her? Why are you talking to her about me? Yan Xingzi was thinking about how to cooperate with her. Although he could plan tactics at the negotiating table and talk and laugh freely, he was really inexperienced in this kind of thing. You know, he just found a quiet place to answer the phone, and then the girl came over and told him that she seemed to upset his girlfriend and wanted to apologize to her just now. Yan Xingzi doesn't think that Bai Zioxi will easily become popular, unless she starts acting again, as it is now. Her face was flushed with anger, her eyes were misty, her pink lips were slightly swollen, she had a thrilling beauty, and the camellia next to her was a bit less charming than her. Yan Xingzi thought of the morning Yan Zekin's straightforward confession of Da Fa. Now he is learning and selling, and in a sincere and indulgent tone, he said, "It's my fault. You shouldn't talk to her. Don't be angry." Seeing him admit his mistake, Bai Zioxi became more and more intolerant, and hammered her with a small fist. "It's your fault and your fault. I don't allow you to talk to others. You don't allow you to look at others." Well. Yan Xingzi let her mess around without a bottom line. You said, am I prettier than her? Is she not as good as my little finger? Yes, you are the most beautiful, no one can compare to your hair. Then you won't like others in your life. Yes, I will never. Hey, it's about the same, but I'm still a little angry. Don't be angry, otherwise I will tell her to go down the mountain now. Yan Xingzi made a faint remark. Bai Zioxi burst into laughter, and quickly changed his face, leaning on him and said greasily, "That's not necessary, I'm the host, so be generous, at least let the guests finish the meal." As she said, she also glanced at Su Sitong with a provocative look. Su Sitong's complexion was flushed long ago. He was young and arrogant. The person he had previously looked down on ruthlessly threw his face on the ground and stepped on the ground. He couldn't stand it and ran away. Bai Zioxi watched her run away, and he made a comparison in his heart, and won another round. Looking back, I was about to talk to the banquet, but found that several people were standing not far away. It is estimated that they heard the movement and came out to watch the excitement. Looking at the whole scene dumbfounded, Tang's sister-in-law muttered in a voice that only she could hear, there are quite a few tricks for the little fairies. She didn't know that Bai Zioxi's ears were extremely sharp. The little fox was shocked at the time. How does she know that she is a little fairy? 010 At the New Year's Eve dinner table, Su Sitong did not show up. According to her sister, she was unwell and did not want to make everyone happy. She is now in the lounge. Su Yingru, as the host, took a few questions, and then revealed it, and no one asked her. Bai Zioxi felt a little frustrated, and asked the banquet in a low voice, "Did I make her angry?" Yang Xing stopped smiling and said, "Probably not adapting to the weather here, she will be fine when she comes home." The little fox didn't have so many twists and turns in his mind, so he believed it and put the matter behind. After the New Year's Eve dinner, you have to send the New Year's Eve money, and everyone who is not married will have a share, except for the banquet. Although he is unmarried, he has a high level of seniority. Basically no one can give him money. He has to go abroad. Bai Zioxi also received it. Su Yingru and Yan Hongzhong gave one, and Yan Xingzi also gave her one. She was holding two big red envelopes and her eyes were bent with a smile. After that, the elders sat together to chat and watch the Spring Festival Gala. Some of the young set up tables to fight the landlord, some ran to the home theater to watch a movie, and a few went down to the mountain party due to the invitation of friends. Bai Zioxi was watching the Spring Festival Gala. Although in the eyes of many people, the Spring Festival Gala is getting more and more boring and there is really nothing to see, but she has not seen it before and saw a group of people dressed up and singing lively. I feel quite interesting. Among a group of middle-aged and elderly people, she sat a young one, and other people chatted about her. The third cousin of Yan Xingzi asked Su Yingru, "How long have Zioxi talked with Xingzi? Have you considered getting married?" Su Yingru said, "No hurry, Zioxi University hasn't finished it yet. I'll talk about it in a year or two." In fact, she and Yan Hongzhong are in a hurry, but who told her son that he likes a little girl, so she can't let people get married first regardless of their studies. Then you can also get engaged first, and get married after graduation. The elder is not too young, but it can't be delayed any longer. Zioxi, don't you? Bai Zioxi was looking attentively. When he heard his name suddenly, he turned his head a little dazedly. "Hey!" She didn't know that she was experiencing countless calamities that must be experienced during the Chinese New Year for single young men and women from 7 aunts and 8 aunts urging marriage. The third cousin is not bad-hearted. She herself is in her 50s. She was married early. She has a son who is the same age as Yang Xing. Now her grandson is 4 or 5 years old. Seeing her little cousin's marriage is still in the foreseeable future, she will inevitably worry about Su Yingru. Just looking at Bai Zioxi's face at a loss, she couldn't figure out what the situation looked like. She shook her head in her heart, her face was childish, she really didn't understand anything. However, since she and Yan Xingzi talked about friends, there are some topics that cannot be avoided. Su Yingru can't talk about it, she can talk about it. The third sister is asking you, have you ever thought about getting engaged with Xingzi first and getting married after graduation? Got engaged? Marry? Bai Zioxi was a little confused. Little Fox loves to learn from TV dramas, but her learning progress has not yet progressed to face the plot of elders urging marriage. She doesn't know this question. She hurriedly searched for the banquet with her eyes, trying to ask for help. Yan Xingzhan talked to his second cousin on the other side, received Bai Zioxi's sight, nodded with the second cousin, and walked here. He smiled and greeted Su Yingru with several people, took Bai Zioxi's shoulder with one hand, and asked her warmly, "Is it boring? Get up and walk." Bai Zioxi hurriedly followed him. "It's tightly guarded." The third cousin snorted, but didn't stop. As the saying goes, for things like picking up persimmons and urging marriage, they can only come to Bai Zioxi, but they dare not test the banquet. She comforted Su Yingru and said, you and my uncle don't need to worry. I think you are so enthusiastic about Xioxi, and marriage will not be too far away. Before that Bai Xioxi had trouble because of Su Sitong, although they did not go out to watch the fun, they also watched in the house. Who could have imagined that the little girl looks so well behaved and can be so noisy in her seizures? What was even more unexpected was that she didn't feel angry at all when she acted, and she played a little bit, and hugged and coaxed. How long did they see him like that? I really broke my glasses. Because of this, the fourth child didn't have the face to stay, and after eating, he took his wife and sister-in-law down the mountain. On the other side, Bai Xioxi fled to the balcony, sticking out his tongue, feeling lingering. The third sister asked me when I would marry you, which scared me to death. The banquet was so funny, he thought she knew that she was sitting among relatives during the new year. Isn't she conscious of it? Don't worry, the third sister will leave tomorrow. He comforted. What about us? In previous years, the banquet was also down the mountain on the first day of the new year. Afterwards, the invitations of friends gatherings, business partners, or banquets and banquets of the family friends can be arranged until the formal work. If you like, you can stay for 2 more days. The implication is that he can't stay that long. Bai Xioxi thought for a while, and said, so many people left at once. Uncle and auntie are definitely not used to it. I will stay on the mountain first, and if necessary, I will go down there. Banquet nodded. Bai Xioxi leaned closer and asked with a smile, I will accept the New Year's money you and uncle and aunt gave me. Give it to you, naturally it is yours. Bai Xioxi gave a little cheer. Unlike the jade bracelet that Su Yingru had given before, she decided to use the lucky money this time as her year-end prize. Although she didn't work for the banquet for a few days, she still needed a sense of ceremony. From far away, a few fireworks sounded from nowhere. Although fireworks are forbidden in the city, it is still possible in many suburbs, but the old house did not purchase fireworks for safety reasons. Like a signal, after the first place started to set off fireworks, other places started responding one after another. There were lush forests near the old house, and they were on the first floor again. Their sight was blocked, and they could only hear but not see. Bai Xioxi was tickled by the movement, and couldn't help but ask the banquet, if you run outside on the mountain road, can you see the fireworks? Seeing her posture, as long as the banquet stops and nods, she can rush out immediately. Yan Xingzi heard the sound of fireworks one after another, and he was in a trance. Many years ago, as a young man, he ran around in this house to see the fireworks under the mountain, and finally found a secret stronghold. He looked into Bai Xioxi's expectant eyes and said, let's go, I'll take you. Bai Xioxi followed the banquet and went upstairs. The main body of the banquet house is a Treste villa, but there is a small attic on the 3rd floor. The banquet thought that no one came to this place now, and there should be a lot of dust. After opening the door, I found that the small attic was closed for too long. The smell is very clean. Obviously, the host family asks people to clean it often. There is only one table in the attic, under the skylight. The table is a few years old, and Bai Xioxi saw that there were still a lot of engraved characters on it. The handwriting was a bit familiar, but obviously childish. She thought that it should have been left over from the banquet when she was young. Yan Xingzi also seemed a little surprised to see those words. He stopped at the table. Bai Xioxi did not urge, for fear that his privacy would be involved, nor did he look at the content of the words carefully, but at the previous glance, she found that the table paint around the handwriting was brighter, as if someone often touched it with his fingers. She thought, is it Su Yingru and Yan Hongzhong? Although there are not many human beings in contact with, Bai Xioxi still noticed that Yan Xingzi's relationship with his parents was not very close. He cares about his parents' bodies and responds politely to their concerns. He will play chess with Hongzhong at the feast, and listen to Su Yingru's chanting of homework. It seems that there is nothing wrong with him, but when doing all this, his expression is gentle and his emotions are calm. There is almost no fluctuation, just like when doing everything else. Bai Zioxi sees from the TV series that the parent-child relationship is really not like this, laughing and cursing, full of flavors. In reality, even if the second cousin is so annoying, her daughter will hold her hand to act like a baby. Faced with her nagging, her son nodded perfunctorily, turned his back and rolled his eyes to make a grimace. No matter good or not, at least they are alive and look real. She didn't know what caused the current situation, and how Yan Xingzi's relationship was with his parents shouldn't be her business. But she looked at Yan Xingzi and looked down at the back of those words, and felt that he was so similar to him sitting in the living room alone when he came back from a business trip early that morning. The little fox doesn't know how to describe the feeling of loneliness, she only knows that such a feast is like a lonely tree on the snow, and it is also like a wild goose she had seen when she was a child. The master said that the wild goose was the last one, and it was destined not to reach the south. Climb up from here. Yan Xingzi said to her when she turned her head and pointed to the skylight. Bai Zioxi returned to his senses and said hurriedly, "Okay." When Yan Xingzi was a child, he needed to use the table foot to climb the skylight. Now he doesn't need it anymore. He pushes the skylight glass open, supports it with his hands on both sides, and flips it onto the roof cleanly, then pulls Bai Zioxi up. The air outside the house was fresh, and the night breeze slowly moved their hair. The prosperous city below the mountain was all displayed in front of you at this time, like an extremely beautiful glass ball, which made people breathless and admired. Several clusters of fireworks exploded silently, and gorgeous flowers bloomed in the night sky, as if performing a mime. After more than 10 seconds, there were sounds one after another. Boom boom boom, it's amazing! Bai Zioxi murmured, knowing that the speed of light and the speed of sound are the same thing, and couldn't help but admire the scene before him. Yan Xingzi didn't speak, but just looked ahead. The time was approaching 12 o'clock, the fireworks became more and more dense, and finally, a bell came from a distance. The old year has passed, and the new year has arrived. Bai Zioxi looked at the fireworks on half of the sky, and his thoughts returned to a long time ago. She learned that the wild goose was destined to die on the way, crying and begging Master for help. Master refused at first, but couldn't stand her rolling and crying, and finally agreed to let the wild goose stay on Mingshan so that it could survive. In the severe winter, gather with its companions when the spring flowers bloom. Happy New Year, Master! Happy New Year! She said to the banquet.